Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, we begin. My name is Victoria, and if you ask me now, I will tell you that I never imagined that loneliness could be so terrifying. I am a 31-year-old woman accustomed to driving throughout the country, both for work and pleasure. My routes usually take me to quiet places, away from the hustle and bustle of cities. But what happened that afternoon in the mountains of West Virginia was something I could never have anticipated. It all started like a common day. I had spent the night in Charleston, in a small inn on the outskirts of the city, resting before continuing my way to Richmond. I like to travel alone, enjoy the road and the freedom of not having to be accountable to anyone. My car, an old Chevrolet I had bought secondhand, was not the most reliable, but it was all I could afford, and I had an attachment to that machine, as if it were part of myself. The road that connected Charleston to Richmond is known for its beauty, but also for how dangerous it can become. The winding mountain route goes along the edge of the abyss, and the tight curves, although of impressive beauty, require constant and attentive driving. The landscape is green with undergrowth covering the slopes and small waterfalls sliding between the rocks. However, that afternoon the weather changed suddenly. The clouds began to darken the sky and rain began to fall heavily. Suddenly, visibility was drastically reduced, and just at that moment, when taking a particularly tight curve, my car lost traction on the wet ground. I could not avoid it. The slip was quick, almost as if the car had been dragged by an invisible hand. I lost control, and before I could react, the vehicle went to the edge of the road and fell a few meters until it stopped in a small ravine with the hood full of dust and fallen branches from nearby trees. My heart was beating wildly, and the noise of the impact echoed in my ears. But there was no immediate pain, just a couple of scratches on my hands and a strange feeling, as if something was watching me from the shadows. I stayed there for a few seconds seated, breathing with difficulty before realizing what had happened. The sunlight had completely faded, and with the rain falling even harder, I felt that disorientation began to invade me. The phone had no signal. I could not believe it. I stayed staring at the steering wheel for what seemed like hours, trying to think of a solution. But the reality was that at that moment, I was completely alone. I decided that the best thing would be to walk to the nearest town. According to the map, Richmond was about 3 hours by car, but on foot it could take much longer. I had no choice. With my spirits somewhat down, I made sure the car was as stable as possible and started walking toward the road, hoping to find some kind of signal or house in the distance. The fresh and humid mountain air chilled my bones, but the worst thing was the feeling of isolation. I saw no light in the distance, not even the typical signs of civilization. The rain continued falling heavily, and the landscape around me seemed increasingly desolate. The shadows of trees lengthened in a strange way, as if they were moving on their own. However, I kept walking. I had no more choice. The terrain began to become steeper. The paths narrowed between rocks and bushes, and tree roots formed natural traps for my feet. Despite the effort, cold and fatigue began to overwhelm me. and the fact that I saw no indication of civilization made me feel a chill on my skin. After a while, I decided to stop to rest under a tree. The air became denser, and I could not avoid the feeling of being watched. Although I knew it was just my mind playing tricks, the feeling of loneliness became something more disturbing. The stillness of the mountain was so deep that any sound, no matter how small, seemed deafening to me. When I decided to continue, I realized I was not alone. A whisper in the distance made me stop. It seemed like someone was talking, or rather murmuring, but there was no one around. The voice, however, seemed to be approaching. I looked around, and the only thing I saw were trees and fog that was beginning to rise between the rocks. My instinct told me I should keep walking, but something inside me told me to stop. I did not do it. I kept moving forward, although with the feeling that something was not right. After another hour of walking, I finally began to see a figure at the end of the path. At first I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or some other mammal in the area. But as I got closer, I saw it was a human figure, a man standing on the road with his gaze fixed on the ground, almost motionless. I approached cautiously, wondering if maybe he was someone who was also lost. The man did not seem to notice my presence, and when I observed him more carefully, I noticed something strange. His clothes were soaked, but he did not have the appearance of a common traveler. His face was covered by a large hat, and his figure was skeletal, as if he had not eaten in days. I felt uncomfortable, but I tried to ask him a question. "Are you lost?" I said with a voice that sounded more trembling than I would have liked. The man did not respond, but took a step to the side, as if he was inviting me to follow him. Something in his attitude made me stop. Distrust took hold of me. I looked at him for a few more seconds and then made a decision. Taking a step back, I began to walk in the opposite direction without looking at him anymore. When I turned around, I felt a strange pressure in the air. I was not alone. My instinct told me that someone else was there watching me. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me, fast and heavy. I turned quickly, but I saw no one, just the creak of leaves and the sound of rain falling on the ground. My breathing quickened and terror began to invade me. The feeling of being followed, of not being alone in that desolate landscape, was palpable. I looked at the sky looking for some sign of light, but the thick fog had erased all trace of civilization. I did not know if I was becoming paranoid or if something really was stalking me. I kept walking at a fast pace, now more determined than ever to find some shelter. But the landscape became increasingly strange. The rocks that before seemed natural now had shapes that resembled human figures. The trees, twisted by the wind, seemed to move and observe me, and the silence became oppressive. The feeling of being trapped between shadows and fog became stronger with each step I took. Finally, after what seemed like hours, I saw a small house in the distance. I immediately felt a wave of relief. I ran toward it hoping to find someone who could help me. But when I arrived, I realized that the house was empty. The windows were broken, and the air inside smelled of humidity and abandonment. No one lived there. And so, in that place forgotten by the world, I realized that the landscape was no longer just desolate. There was something else in the air, something I could not explain, a presence that did not seem human. I stood in front of the house, completely disoriented. The door was ajar as if someone had left it in that state and never closed it completely. I thought for a moment about entering, maybe finding something that would help me, but something inside me prevented me from doing it. I do not know if it was the fact that the place looked abandoned for a long time, or if that strange feeling of being watched was affecting me more than I thought. I looked around looking for some sign of life. There were no animals. There was no sound of birds singing, not even the sound of an insect. The air was so still that I felt as if time itself had stopped. I walked around the house looking for some indication of recent activity, but everything seemed in ruins. The walls were covered with moss, and the broken windows let in the rain that swirled with the wind. There was nothing, absolutely nothing that indicated that this place had been inhabited in recent years. In the end, I decided I should continue on my way. Richmond was not so far, or so I thought. At least if I kept walking along that same route, I would eventually find something else, someone, some sign that I was not completely alone in that desolate landscape. Before leaving, I took one last look at the house. Something in the entrance caught my attention. An old wooden bench covered by fog was right at the threshold of the door. It seemed recently placed, which made no sense. If the house was uninhabited, who would have left the bench there? I could not explain it, but a feeling of uneasiness ran down my back. I did not think much about it. I turned around and continued walking along the narrow path that began to climb the mountain. The terrain was increasingly steep, and the weather was not improving. The rain fell intermittently, and the cold drops soaked me to the bones. As I climbed, my thoughts became clouded. I could not avoid the feeling of being trapped in a strange place, a landscape that did not belong to me. I knew Richmond could not be so far, but something inside me told me there was something in the air I should not ignore. In the distance, I saw what seemed to be a figure. It was standing in the same direction I had walked, almost as if it was waiting for me. At first I thought it was some kind of traveler, someone who had also gotten lost in the mountain. But as I got closer, the figure began to move, sliding slowly between the trees. It was a tall figure, dressed in dark clothes and with a hat that covered its face. I could not distinguish details, but the feeling that something was not right took hold of me quickly. I stopped. My breathing quickened, and without knowing why I began to walk in the opposite direction, without looking back. The terrain was difficult, full of stones and roots, but fear pushed me to keep running. Every time I looked back, the figure seemed to be closer, although I did not see it clearly. Only the feeling of its presence, as if it was stalking me, made me quicken my pace. The wind rose strongly, and the fog, which before was thick, now seemed to move like a curtain I could not cross. I looked around, but I could no longer see anything clearly. The path had disappeared, and in its place there was only a landscape that seemed to have been transformed. The rocks that before were firmly in their place now seemed to move as if they were being dragged by something invisible. My mind began to collapse under the weight of anxiety. I needed a shelter, a place where I could hide. Suddenly I saw a small opening between the rocks, a natural passage that seemed to lead to some kind of cave. Without thinking, I threw myself there looking for something that would give me a chance to escape. I entered the darkness breathing with difficulty, and at first I thought I had saved myself, but something was not right. As I settled in the cave, the air became denser, as if the very darkness was absorbing me. I sat on the ground, looking around, looking for an exit. The sound of rain on the stones of the cave became a deafening echo. And then I heard it, a low and distant whisper. as if someone was talking very close to my ear. I stayed still, hoping it was the wind, but the whisper was repeated more clearly now, as if it was speaking directly to my ear. I could not understand the words, but the feeling of terror grew and my mind began to look for a logical explanation, although I knew there was none. Then something moved inside the cave. At first I thought it could be an animal, a snake, or a rodent. But when my eyes got used to the twilight, I saw something I could not explain. Some shadows slid along the walls of the cave, dark figures that moved with a strange slowness, as if they were not subject to the rules of physics. My breathing quickened and panic invaded me again. I could not stay there, but I could not leave either. The shadows seemed to be surrounding me, approaching little by little. Suddenly, a scream, a heartbreaking sound cut the air. It was the scream of a woman, or at least that seemed to me. It was so intense, so full of desperation, that I felt a stab in my chest. My body trembled and my mind began to play tricks on me. Was I dreaming? Was I dead? Or was there something else in that place? Something I could not see. I could not stand it anymore. I ran out of the cave as fast as I could, without caring about the stones that hurt my feet. The fresh air hit my face, but the feeling of being pursued did not disappear. I looked back and saw for a brief moment a human figure at the entrance of the cave, watching me with empty eyes. I could not breathe, and before I realized it, my legs no longer responded. I fell to the ground exhausted, and only then did I realize what I had been looking for all that time. A safe place, but the mountain had nothing safe. The landscape, that apparently peaceful landscape, was much more dangerous than I could have imagined, not only because of the terrain, but because of what was in it, something I could not see or understand, but that was present, always lurking in the shadows. The cold mountain air filled my lungs as I lay there on the wet ground, my whole body shaking from exhaustion and terror. I do not know how long I stayed there, but eventually I forced myself to get up. I had to keep moving. I had to find my way back to civilization, away from whatever was in that cursed place. I stumbled through the undergrowth, no longer caring about direction, just wanting to put distance between myself and that cave, that house, that figure that had watched me with those hollow eyes. The rain had stopped, but the fog remained thick, wrapping around me like ghostly fingers. Hours seemed to pass before I finally saw lights in the distance. Real lights, electric lights from a small mountain town. I nearly cried with relief as I stumbled toward those welcoming beacons of human presence. When I reached the edge of town, an elderly man walking his dog found me, soaked and shivering, my clothes torn from branches and my face pale with exhaustion. He helped me to the local diner, where the warm light and smell of coffee felt like salvation itself. The owner, a kind woman named Ruth, wrapped me in blankets and called a tow truck for my car. As I sat there, warming my hands around a steaming mug, I wanted to tell them what I had experienced. But when I opened my mouth, the words seemed inadequate, too strange, too unbelievable. Instead, I simply said I had gotten lost after my car broke down. They accepted this explanation with the kindness that small mountain communities show to travelers in distress. The tow truck driver found my car the next morning, exactly where I had left it, and surprisingly, it started without any problems. The mechanic said there was nothing wrong with it that a little drying out could not fix. But I knew something had changed. As I drove away from those mountains, taking the main highway instead of the scenic route, I could not shake the feeling that something had followed me part of the way. Something that had watched me struggle through the forest, had seen my fear, had fed on my terror. I never took that mountain road again. Whenever my work required travel through West Virginia, I chose the longer interstate routes, even if they added hours to my journey. The beauty of those winding mountain roads, once so appealing to me, now seemed like a trap, a lure for the unwary. Sometimes, years later, I would wake in the middle of the night, thinking I heard that whisper again, that unintelligible murmur that had followed me through the forest. And I would remember the figure at the cave entrance, with its empty eyes and unnatural stillness. And I would know that some places hold secrets that are better left undisturbed. The mountains of West Virginia are still there, as beautiful and treacherous as ever. But I learned that day that nature is not always the peaceful refuge we think it is. Sometimes, in the most remote and lonely places, older things dwell. Things that have been there long before roads were carved through their domain. Things that do not welcome intruders into their shadowed realm. And sometimes, when the fog rolls in thick, and the wind carries strange sounds through the trees, those things still watch, still wait, still follow those foolish enough to venture alone into their ancient hunting grounds. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. My name is Andrew, and I never imagined that what would begin as a peaceful mountain excursion would become an experience that would mark my life forever. I am from Chicago, and although I enjoy the tranquility of natural landscapes, I had never had the time or opportunity to venture fully into one of the most isolated routes in the Rocky Mountains. A friend had told me a lot about the beauty of the place, so I decided to take a solo excursion as a small escape from daily stress. I made the decision in a couple of days. I wanted to disconnect from all the work, routine, commitments. I am not an expert in mountaineering, but at least I was used to walking through nature. I have always enjoyed peaceful spaces, so I prepared the basics: a backpack with water, some food, a map, and my hiking boots. The idea was to take a short day hike, climb to a viewpoint from where I could see the valley below, and return before dark. The weather was perfect, not too hot, with a light breeze that moved the leaves of the trees. I left the city early in the morning, leaving behind the hustle and bustle, and gradually entering a landscape that became increasingly wild. The route seemed simple. There was not much to get lost. At least that is what I thought at first. The first part of the journey was full of beauty. The tall trees, the wildflowers, the sound of birds, the fresh air, everything enveloped me in a way that relaxed me. There was nothing to interrupt that peace, no car noises, no human voices. The trail was well marked, and soon I reached a small clearing. I decided to rest there for a moment, drinking water and observing the landscape. The sun filtered through the branches, creating shadows that danced gently on the earth. I enjoyed the solitude. On the contrary, I enjoyed it. These types of moments were what I needed to clear my mind. But as I continued, I began to notice something strange. At first, it was something almost imperceptible, a feeling of being watched. There was nothing around that could cause me alarm, but I felt as if someone was nearby. I ignored that feeling, thinking that my mind was simply playing a trick on me. The trail continued climbing, and as I did, the marking signs began to fade. The arrows painted on rocks or trees gradually disappeared. I found myself alone on an increasingly narrow trail, surrounded by thick vegetation. I thought maybe I had deviated a little, but I continued walking confidently. At that moment, doubts were not enough to worry me. It was when I reached a small ravine that I really began to feel uncomfortable. The sound of flowing water was relaxing, but looking around, something seemed strange to me. The terrain, although natural, seemed too orderly, almost as if someone had left it that way on purpose, as if the trees were distributed in a way that was not completely random. I did not understand it well at that moment, but there was something in the atmosphere that made me doubt. I continued walking, and the trail became increasingly diffuse. The footprints and marks on the trees were no longer clear. I looked at my map, but it did not seem to match anything I was seeing. It was not possible. This trail was not marked on my map or on the maps I had found online. I stopped for a moment, unable to decide whether I should go back or continue forward. The afternoon was beginning to fall, and the light was becoming dimmer between the shadows of the trees. I decided that the best thing would be to backtrack a little and look for the correct route, but when I turned to return, I saw something that made my heart race. In the distance between the trees, there was a figure. It did not move, it was completely motionless. At first I thought it could be another hiker, but something in the posture of that figure disturbed me. It was as if it was watching me fixedly, almost too fixedly. The figure did not seem to have clear details, just a human shadow standing hunched over, as if it was waiting for me to see it. Almost without thinking, I decided to continue on my way, but I could not stop looking toward that point where I had seen the figure. As I advanced, I felt my steps becoming heavier. The air had changed. Now it was denser, and the temperature, although still mild, was a little uncomfortable to me. I decided it was time to return, but when I tried to take the trail I had come from, I realized something chilling. I no longer recognized the path. Nothing seemed the same. The trees were not the same, nor the rocks I had passed before. It was as if I had entered another place, another world, or at least that is how I felt. Panic began to settle in my chest, but I tried to stay calm. I took out the map again, but not even the indications on it were useful to me. I did not know which way to go. At that moment, I realized I was lost. The sound of water from the stream had faded, and everything was in absolute silence. No birds or insects or anything were heard. The stillness was deep, almost terrifying. I decided to walk along a new trail, one that seemed more open, but as I advanced, strange things began to happen. First, it was the sound. I heard footsteps behind me, but when I turned, there was no one. I thought it could be my mind playing tricks, but then the noises became clearer. Footsteps, leaves crunching, a brush between branches. I felt watched, but there was no one. Suddenly, I noticed something else. Small figures scattered along the path. They were not human figures, but they were not animals either. They were like small branches or shadows intertwined with the earth, something that did not belong there. At first I thought they were just fallen branches, but when I approached I realized they were arranged in strange patterns, as if someone had placed those figures in that place deliberately. That was what made me stop dead. The feeling of not being alone was stronger than ever. My instinct told me that something was not right, and it was as if the whole place was designed to confuse me. I looked around looking for an exit, something familiar. Suddenly, I saw a kind of reflection between the trees, a figure again. This time, it was much closer. The figure was a silhouette of a person, a shadow that moved through the forest like a ghost. It was not completely clear, but I could distinguish an erect, rigid posture, watching me. Fear flooded me, and I did not think of anything else. I ran without thinking about the path, just to get away from that presence. My steps echoed on the dry ground while the air became denser, as if it was trying to catch me. I did not look back, I could not. The feeling of being followed intensified, but I did not dare stop to check if there really was someone behind me. Finally, after what seemed like hours, I found a clearing. I was exhausted, with shortness of breath, and my body was covered with scratches from the branches. Somehow, I found the way back. I knew I could not continue more time there. I did not look back at the trail or the figures in the forest again. That night, I camped near the clearing, without daring to venture further. The experience left me marked. I could not stop thinking about what I had seen, about the shadows that moved, about the figures arranged on the ground. Something was not right in that place. When the next day I was able to return to civilization, I never talked about it with anyone again. But that experience, that strange and terrifying feeling of being watched, never faded. Every time I look at the mountains in the distance, something tells me there are trails that should not be entered. After my experience in the mountain, I tried to continue with my life as if nothing had happened, but the feeling of restlessness would not leave me in peace. Weeks passed, and although I tried to forget it, my mind kept returning to that strange and lonely trail. The fear settled in me, not so much for what I saw, but for the feeling of being trapped in an unknown place, of being stalked by something invisible. That feeling of being watched, even when there was no one nearby, accompanied me in my daily life. In fact, anxiety began to affect my sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, the memories of that night haunted me. The shadows, the footsteps behind me, the strange figures on the ground. It was difficult to ignore those thoughts when they were so vividly etched in my mind. I tried to rationalize everything that had happened. I was exhausted, I told myself. Maybe stress had played a trick on me, but there was something inside me that knew I could not explain everything with simple excuses. A couple of months later, I received a message from an old friend, Daniel. I met him when we studied together, and although we did not have constant contact, from time to time we caught up on our lives. He told me he was planning a trip to the same area of the Rockies, a long journey of several days, and asked me if I wanted to accompany him. It was a tempting invitation, but immediately a part of me rebelled. I had spent so much time avoiding that region that the idea of returning filled me with discomfort. I was not ready to face what had happened. I was not sure if I could bear it again, but at the same time, something in me told me I should go, that somehow I had to face my fears. Maybe it was a way to make sense of what had happened. Maybe what I lived in the mountain was nothing more than a series of bad decisions combined with my fatigue and my paranoia. I thought that if I returned, I could get rid of that feeling of anguish that still haunted me. So I accepted the invitation, and a couple of weeks later, I found myself on the road again, this time with Daniel in his truck heading to the same Rockies. While we traveled, I tried to maintain a positive attitude, but the air in my chest was still heavy. Daniel noticed my nervousness and asked me several times if everything was okay, but I did not want to worry him. I just told him I had had a bad experience in that place the last time I was there, but that it was nothing more than a silly story, a bad time we all have sometime. When we arrived at the starting point of the trail, I could not help feeling uncomfortable. The mountains, so imposing and majestic, seemed to have a presence that crushed me. The vegetation was dense and the fresh air, but that same tranquility that used to relax me now caused me a feeling of claustrophobia, as if the whole environment was watching my movements. Daniel, on the other hand, was excited. He had researched the route and looked confident, as if he was prepared for any challenge. We began walking along the trail, and everything seemed to be in order. As we advanced, the landscape became increasingly wild. There were no sounds of animals or birds, nothing more than the crunch of our boots on the ground. It was an absolute silence, as if the world around had stopped. At first, Daniel did not seem to notice anything strange, but I could not stop looking around. Every time I looked between the trees, I seemed to see a shadow move quickly, as if someone or something was sliding behind them. "Is everything okay?" Daniel asked me, seeing that I stopped frequently to look back. I nodded, but I was not sure what I felt. "Maybe I am just tired," I told him, trying to downplay it. Hours passed, and the walk became more arduous. The trail was not as marked as we thought, and at times we had to improvise to find the best path. Daniel seemed to enjoy the adventure, but I felt that something was not right. We reached a point where the trail divided into several directions. We decided to take the one that seemed most used, although there was no clear sign. As we advanced, the environment became more tense. The sunlight began to fade between the trees and the air became heavier. It was then that something made me stop dead. On the ground, next to a fallen trunk, there was a series of branches arranged strangely. At first I thought they were just fallen branches, but looking at them more closely I realized they were placed deliberately. They formed a pattern I could not ignore, something that seemed intentional, like a strange symbol. Daniel, who had been ahead, turned around, hearing my agitated breathing. "What is wrong?" he asked, looking at me with concern. "This," I stammered, pointing to the branches. "Do you realize what they are doing with them?" Daniel approached and observed the pattern. It seemed confused at first, like a series of lines and angles that did not fit. "It is just a couple of branches, Andrew," he said, as if trying to calm me. "Probably some animal moved them, or someone left that as a joke." I could not convince him. I knew something was not right. I remembered the figures I saw on the trail, the shadows that slid between the trees, and I felt invaded by the same feeling of being watched, that we were not alone. But Daniel insisted it was nothing, and I tried to move forward. Despite my growing discomfort, we continued walking. The afternoon began to fall quickly. We were moving further and further away from known routes, and the environment was becoming increasingly gloomy. We could no longer see the sun, and darkness began to envelop us. It was at that moment that I heard something behind us, a sound of light but clear footsteps, as if someone was following us. At first I tried to convince myself it was just the echo of our own steps, but the sound continued. "Do you hear it?" I asked Daniel, stopping dead. He looked at me with some bewilderment. "Hear what?" he replied without changing his expression. "There is nothing." "Come on, let us continue." But I could hear it clearly. They were footsteps and they were not ours. I looked around, but I saw nothing. However, my skin crawled. I was not alone. Something or someone was there following us, and it was not a coincidence. I felt that something was approaching more and more, something I could not see, but I knew it was there. The tension became unbearable, and without realizing it, I began to walk faster, almost running. Daniel looked at me worried, but I could not stop. I had to get out of there. I had to find the way back. I quickened my pace, but the noises continued. I was sure someone was following us. Suddenly, I stumbled over a root and fell to the ground. When I got up, I saw something that chilled my blood. Right in front of us, between the trees, there was a figure. It was standing on the trail, motionless. The figure was not clear, but its eyes shone with a strange intensity. I could feel how its gaze pierced me, and a feeling of pure terror invaded me. "Run!" I shouted to Daniel, who, seeing my pale face, finally seemed to understand what was happening. He did not ask, he just started running behind me. We ran down the trail without looking back until we finally reached a more open area. The sound of footsteps ceased immediately, and for a moment everything was silent again. But fear was still there lurking. Several hours passed until we managed to return to a known place near a small shelter. We did not talk much after that. We both knew what we had felt, but neither of us said anything. When we finally reached the starting point, the sun had already set and the air felt cold. We never talked about what happened again. Since that excursion, I never approached that mountain again. And although I cannot affirm with certainty what it was that I experienced that afternoon, what I know is that something was there following me, watching me, something I could not understand. But I always remembered as a reminder that sometimes the quietest trails hide something much darker. I'm not one to dwell on the past, but there are things that stick to you in a way that if you don't get them out, it seems like they'll rot inside. My name is Alina. Today my life is peaceful, but it took time to get here. Before everything happened, I had what anyone would call a good life, simple. Me and my husband, Leonard, built our house from scratch, on land that belonged to his parents. Every brick, every window, we chose ourselves. It didn't have luxury, but it had our smell our way. My younger brother, Peter, was always my great partner. Sister thing, you know. Since we were little, we understood each other with a look. Adult life separated us a bit, which is normal, but we talked every week until he got married about 4 years ago. Her name is Morgan. He met her on one of those business trips, a girl from far away, with a different accent, and in less than 6 months they were already living together. The first time I saw her was at a Sunday lunch at our house. My mom made that pasta dish only she knows how. The whole family gathered on the porch, that good noise of happy people, and Morgan, she was there, but wasn't. You know when the person appears a piece from another puzzle. She was beautiful. She had black hair, straight, that fell right to her waist, but the look was heavy. She stood still, quiet in a corner, just watching, with a little smile that didn't reach her eyes. While we laughed, told stories, she ran her finger on the edge of the glass, silent. I even tried to strike up conversation, ask about her city, what she liked to do. The answers were short, one word only. Yeah, don't know, maybe. At the time I thought it was just shyness, that she felt like a fish out of water in the middle of our mess. Leonard even commented to me later quietly, "Your new sister-in-law is weird, huh?" I defended at the time, said it was just her way, that we needed to give time for her to loosen up. Little did I know that silence wasn't shyness, it was something else. Something that was just waiting for the right moment to settle in. Over time, her presence at family gatherings decreased. First, they were excuses. "Morgan has a headache. We have commitment." Then there wasn't even excuse anymore. Peter appeared alone, stayed little, always seemed rushed. We felt something was wrong, but brother doesn't get into husband and wife fight, right? At least not without being called. His distance was what hurt most. Calls became rare. Messages were dry. It wasn't my brother there. Until one day, after almost 3 months without seeing each other properly, he called me. Said he and Morgan would stop by for coffee in the late afternoon. I was excited. I thought things were settling. I prepared a cake, brewed fresh coffee, left the house all tidy. They arrived on a gray afternoon, one of those when the sky weighs. The mood came in with them. Morgan gave me a kiss on the cheek, but her cheek was cold, dry skin. She sat on the sofa and stayed there looking at a fixed point on the wall. Peter tried to pull conversation, talked about work, weather, but the conversation died. I served the cake. She took a tiny piece, barely touched it. After a few sips of coffee, she got up. "Alina, can I use your bathroom?" Her voice sounded almost like a whisper. "Of course, make yourself at home. It's the second door in the hallway." And she went and took time. Took a long time, 20 minutes, half hour. Peter and I stayed in the living room, silence increasingly embarrassing. I was already starting to worry, thinking if she had gotten sick. When I finally got up to go see what was happening, the door opened and she came out with pale face, without saying a word. Sat again on the sofa, as if nothing had happened. Shortly after, they said goodbye and left. That night, I couldn't sleep right. The house, which was always my refuge, seemed strange. The air became dense, heavy, as if their visit had left a trail, invisible dirt. I had a nagging headache that wouldn't go away with medicine. At dawn, I woke up with certainty that someone was standing outside my bedroom door. I knew it was impossible. Leonard slept heavy beside me, but the sensation was so real I could barely breathe. That was just the beginning. That's where everything started going wrong. The next day dawned worse. I woke up with my body sore, as if I had taken a beating during the night. I started having headaches all the blessed day, a tiredness that wasn't from work. It was tiredness that came from inside, that didn't go away with sleep, sucked my energy, and left me wanting to stay in bed all day. I lost my appetite. Food, which was always my pleasure and my breadwinner, started tasting like nothing. I had a small kitchen at home where I made snacks and sweets by order. It was my pride, but customers started disappearing. One order was canceled, another didn't turn out good. The money that was already tight started lacking. Fights with Leonard started over nothing. A glass out of place, wet towel on the bed. Things we didn't even notice before became reason for ugly arguments with words we regretted later. He also felt the heavy house, but couldn't explain. Said I was stressed, that I needed to relax. "Alina, you need to distract yourself. We don't go out anymore. You only stay inside the house brooding over things," he told me one night, trying to be gentle. Distract myself how, Leonard? I don't have strength even to wash my hair. It seems like there's a weight on top of me all the time. I replied with eyes already full of tears. I went to the health center. They examined me, took my blood, asked for a battery of tests. I spent days in that anguish waiting for a result that would tell me what I had, and the result came. Nothing, everything normal. The doctor gave me some vitamins, talked about stress, anxiety, said maybe I was starting depression. But I knew it wasn't that. It was different. I felt all the time that someone was watching me, a bad presence that seemed to enjoy my suffering. At home, things got worse. I woke up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, heart beating out of rhythm. I started having horrible nightmares, confused dreams, where I was in a dark place and heard Morgan's laughter coming from far away. I was wasting away, and the worst was that nobody seemed to understand. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize myself anymore. I was thinner, with deep dark circles, with a scared look that wasn't mine. It seemed like I was disappearing little by little, and had no idea how to fight against that. Weeks dragged in that silent agony. I no longer had strength to look for doctors, to try to find logic in what was happening. I just survived one day at a time. Leonard, poor thing, tried to help, but was lost. He saw me wasting away and felt powerless. The house, which was our corner, had become a place of anguish. I spent days cleaning, scrubbing, as if I could tear away that bad feeling along with the dust. It was in one of those desperate cleanings that everything changed. I was organizing our closet, taking everything out to reorganize. At the bottom of my underwear drawer, under some pieces I hardly used, my hand touched something strange. It wasn't fabric, it was rough, shapeless. I pulled. It was a little rag doll, crude, poorly made. It was about 4 inches, tied with red thread. The body was dark fabric, stained, but the doll's hair was mine, unmistakable. And in her chest, a rusty pin was stuck right in the center. My whole body stopped. It wasn't a chill down the spine, it was internal paralysis, as if all my organs had stopped working for a second. I stayed there on my knees on the bedroom floor, with that thing in my hand, and Morgan's image came to my head with frightening clarity. The visit, the delay in the bathroom, her look, everything fit. It wasn't paranoia, it wasn't stress, it was her. I dropped the doll in the drawer as if it burned and closed hard. I stayed shaking, not knowing what to do. Tell Leonard, he would think I was crazy. Throw it away. What if it got worse? I understood nothing of that. A few days later, I was in front of the house, sweeping the sidewalk, more out of habit than desire. Miss Vilma, an old neighbor, one of those who sees everything from the window, stopped at the gate. "Is everything okay, my daughter?" she asked with real concern in her look. "You're so down, so skinny." I couldn't stand it. I broke down crying right there with broom in hand. I didn't tell about the doll, but talked about tiredness, pains, bad feeling in the house. She listened to everything in silence, shaking her head slowly. When I finished, she approached and spoke low, almost in secret. "Alina, listen. There are things that clinic doctor doesn't cure. Sometimes our evil is not of the body, it's meanness from people who don't want to see us well." Those words, instead of scaring me, gave me a strange kind of relief. It was the first time someone really understood what I felt. I wasn't crazy. That was real. Miss Vilma gave me a phone number written on a piece of bread paper. The name was just Rose. She said this lady lived on a remote farm past the main road and understood these things. That night I showed the paper to Leonard, a healer. "Alina, for God's sake," he reacted exactly as I expected, running his hand over his tired face. "Are we going to fall into charlatan talk now? And what do you want me to do?" My voice came out louder than I wanted. Wait sitting until there's nothing left of me. I found something, Leonard, in our drawer. A doll with my hair. I told him with trembling voice. He stayed silent for a long time, looked lost. I saw on his face the confusion, the fight between not wanting to believe and being afraid. Finally, he sighed defeated. Okay, I'll take you, but if I smell swindle, we leave right away. I called the next day. A hoarse and firm voice answered without beating around the bush. I said my name and she just said, "You can come tomorrow before the sun sets," and hung up. The way was long, about 25 miles on a dirt road that shook the whole car. The further we got from asphalt, the thicker and more closed the woods became. We arrived at a simple ranch, with wooden gate falling down and some chickens pecking in the yard. Miss Rose waited for us on the porch sitting in a rocking chair. She was a lady about 70 years old, thin, with skin wrinkled by sun and white hair tied in tight bun. Her eyes were dark and seemed to pierce us. She analyzed me from top to bottom. "He stays outside," she said, pointing her chin at Leonard. "You come in." Her living room smelled of dry herbs and candle wax. It had few furniture, an altar in corner with some images and many twigs hanging on walls. She told me to sit in wooden chair in front of her. "No need to tell me your story, I'm already seeing." She spoke without looking away from me. "Your evil wasn't born in you, it was placed. It's work done by envy. Envy of your house, your husband, your life. And who did it is woman. And she's close to your blood, isn't she? But drinks from your coffee." Each word was like a stone. She wants to dry you, dry your joy, your money, your marriage. Miss Rose paused and looked at me deep, and wants to dry your womb too, so you never put a child in the world. That hit me right on. Me and Leonard tried to have a child for almost 2 years without success. Doctors said everything was fine with us, just keep trying. I had never told that to anyone in family. Miss Rose had no way to know. At that moment there, all my doubt ended. That woman in that simple house in middle of nowhere knew my life more than I myself. Miss Rose gave me a list of things to do. They were precise instructions, no room for error. Baths with bitter herbs for 7 straight nights, always after midnight. Specific prayers I had never heard before to be prayed facing the street door. And most important, discipline and faith. She warned me that when we start cleaning, dirt reacts. Don't expect peace, girl. Expect war. What's stuck to you won't want to come out easy. You'll have to be stronger, she said, handing me a cloth bag with herbs. I returned home in silence. Leonard didn't ask me anything, but I saw on his face that the conversation with Miss Rose outside had changed something. He was no longer doubting, he was afraid. That same night I started, waited for Leonard to sleep, and went to bathroom. Shower water, mixed with rue and guinea herbs, released strong smell that impregnated air. Water ran down my body with greenish color, dark. It was strange sensation. Skin burned a little. After bath, couldn't dry myself. Had to wrap myself in white sheet and pray as she ordered. First night was worst. As soon as I turned off bedroom light, noises started. They weren't normal house creaks. They were light scratches coming from inside corridor wall. Then, sound of something falling in kitchen. My whole body got tense. I covered my head with comforter. Heart seemed it would come out through mouth, praying low until day dawned. Second night after bath, when I was in middle of prayer in living room, porch light burned with dry crack, leaving us in complete darkness. Leonard jumped from bed. What was that? he shouted from bedroom. The light burned, I replied, trying to keep voice firm. He appeared at living room door, lighting corridor with cell phone flashlight. Light beams swept corridor, and for fraction of second, lit something that shouldn't be there. It didn't have defined shape. It was stain of dark that seemed to absorb flashlight light before retreating to wall and disappear. We both saw. Nobody said anything, but I saw terror in his eyes. He finally believed me. Each night that passed, house seemed battlefield. Cabinet doors opened by themselves, objects changed place. I felt constant cold in certain rooms, even with windows closed, but I didn't stop. Fear was immense, but anger, to have my life back, was bigger. I followed Miss Rose's instructions to the letter, moved by determination I didn't know I had. I was expelling that from my house, even if it was last thing I did. After seventh bath, last step was hardest. Miss Rose called it return, the giving back. It wasn't to do harm, she explained. It was just to return energy to its origin. For that, I needed something that had been touched by who did evil. My stomach turned. How would I get that? An answer came by chance. I was separating some old clothes to donate, task I postponed for months, and at bottom of bag I felt different fabric. It was cheap synthetic silk scarf. I knew it wasn't mine, and faint smell of perfume that wasn't mine was still there. It was hers. Ritual was to be done on dawn of waning moon. On white china plate I put her scarf. On top the doll I found in drawer. Beside, I lit black candle and white one. Had to pray prayer Miss Rose taught me, asking that all evil sent to me return to its starting point. That knots be undone, and that universe justice take care of rest. While candle burned, scarf fabric started darkening, as if soot rose from it, and smell of burnt hair filled air. At end, when flame went out, I heard sound of glass breaking, loud and clear, coming from back of house. Didn't go see. Stayed there sitting on kitchen floor until day cleared. From that moment, house silenced. Air became light. I slept whole night for first time in months. Pains disappeared. Appetite returned. Leonard looked at me with relief that mirrored mine. Peace had returned, but peace has price. 2 days later, Peter called me desperate. Alina, I don't know what's happening. Morgan snapped. He told she didn't sleep, that she walked around house talking to herself. Said she saw things that felt someone watching her. Had crying and anger crises for no apparent reason. He found her scratching bedroom walls themselves, saying she needed to take eyes out of there. My heart sank. Part of me felt terrible relief, confirmation I was right. But other part, that loved my brother, felt weight of what I had done. Worst happened week later. I was downtown, leaving market when I saw her across street. It was Morgan, but seemed just her shell. She was much thinner. Hair that before was always neat, now was messy and dirty, wrinkled clothes. She stood still, staring at store window, but her eyes didn't focus anything. She muttered things to own reflection. When her look crossed mine for second, there was no recognition. It was empty look, dead. I felt chill, but it wasn't fear, it was guilt. I had won war, but now needed to live with image of my defeated enemy. And she looked too much like victim. Didn't take long for their marriage to end. Peter left house, stayed few days with my parents, and then rented small room for himself downtown. He told me that in last conversation he asked her face if she had done something against me. Morgan didn't deny. First she accused him of being crazy, but when he mentioned my name, she broke down. In middle of cry that mixed anger and despair, she confessed fear of losing him, saying she felt our family was swallowing her. After that, Peter gathered things and left. Nobody had news of Morgan anymore. They say her family picked her up and took her back to city where she came from. We simply stopped saying her name. It was as if word was forbidden. Life little by little returned to tracks. I resumed my orders, customers returned. House filled with smell of baking cake again. Peter recovered, got better job. He seemed older, more serious, but was at peace. We never touched subject directly again, but one looked at other and knew. About 2 months after that whole nightmare, I started feeling strange, nausea, different tiredness. It was good tiredness of life forming. Test came positive, pregnant. I looked at that result and cried, not explosive joy, but deep relief, as if old debt had finally been paid. I went to see Miss Rose one last time to thank. I took her fresh cheese, best I found at fair. She received me with same serious look. Life opens when poison dries, she said before I even talked about pregnancy. But listen well, girl, where curse attacks, earth stays marked. What they did to you left scar on your soul. Won't hurt anymore, but it's there. It's door, you need to keep it closed. And that was biggest lesson I took from all that. Today my daughter runs through yard. My house is place of peace, but I changed. Naivety went away. I learned that evil doesn't need reason. Sometimes just others' happiness is enough. I learned to be vigilant. I do my prayers, keep rue branch at door. Light my incense, not from fear, but from respect, because I know world is full of doors and I, by choice and necessity, learned to keep mine locked. Peace I have today wasn't free. I fought for it and protect it every day. My name is Luke. I am 28 years old, and until recently I would never have imagined that something like what I lived could happen to me. Before telling what occurred, I must clarify that I am not one of those who believe in strange things, in urban legends, or in paranormal stories. For me, all that was always a product of imagination or minds influenced by horror movies. However, after what happened in that mountain, my perspective changed forever. It was during the summer, with the heat of the city pushing us to escape the hustle and bustle. We decided, a group of friends, to go camping in the Cascade Mountains, a remote and secluded place north of Seattle. We knew the stories about the site. They said that the mountains kept secrets, that some travelers never returned from there. But as usually happens, those stories were just tales to scare the little ones. So without thinking much about it, we organized the trip. My group of friends consisted of 4 people. Charles, my best friend since childhood. Marina, his girlfriend, who had always been a bit fearful but fun. Alexander, a serious guy, but who was not afraid of anything. And me, the one who carried the voice of reason. Although many times I let myself be carried away by the desire for adventure. The ascent was calm. We carried everything necessary, backpacks, food, water, flashlights, and of course, a good dose of optimism. We laughed and talked about what awaited us at the summit, ignorant of what would happen that very night. When we reached the top, the landscape was impressive. In the distance, you could see the valleys and mountains covered by a green mantle. We chose a clearing to set up camp. The sun was already beginning to hide behind the mountains, so we hurried to light the campfire. As the flame began to catch, we shared some stories, and as expected, jokes about ghosts and local legends were not lacking. Marina at first seemed a little uncomfortable. She was bothered by the fact of being so far from civilization, but seeing that we were all calm, she tried to relax. The campfire gave us warmth, and the night began to fall with its usual calm, when suddenly something strange happened. We were sitting around the campfire chatting and eating when Charles got up to go to the backpack and get more snacks. As he walked toward the camp, something caught my attention. I saw out of the corner of my eye how one of the backpacks moved by itself, as if someone was pushing it slightly. I did not pay attention to it at first. Probably the wind had moved the backpack, but then, looking better, I saw that there was no wind. The air was completely calm, as if nature itself had stopped. "Charles," I called, looking for an answer while I approached slowly. The rest of my friends had not noticed what was happening, since they continued conversing. When I approached, the backpack stopped moving, but something in my stomach told me it was not as calm as it seemed. I thought it had been my imagination, or maybe a tree branch moving in the distance. But uneasiness began to settle in me. I returned to the fire and tried to ignore it, but then something else happened. We heard a creak in the distance coming from the forest. I thought it was an animal, but it was a sound too clear and sharp, as if someone was walking among the dry leaves. "Did you hear that?" asked Alexander, who had been silent for a while. We all looked at him. "It must be some animal," I tried to convince them, but my voice trembled a little more than I expected. The conversation changed subject, and we got distracted a bit. But that strange feeling kept hovering around me. Suddenly we heard a series of soft noises. First they were footsteps, then a tapping. Something was moving at the edge of the camp. We looked at each other disconcerted. "It is not normal," said Charles in a serious tone, which he rarely did. It was then that Marina, visibly upset, got up and began to check the backpacks. "Luke, my bag," she exclaimed, looking horrified as her backpack moved by itself, just like the one before. Now it was no longer a small shake. The bag slid slowly across the ground, as if someone invisible was pulling it. My friends and I approached quickly, but before we could do anything, the sound of breaking branches came from the forest. They were not the typical sounds of an animal, not even of wind moving the leaves. They were heavy, slow footsteps, as if someone was walking toward us. But without us being able to see it, fear began to settle in the air, and we all fell silent listening. The noises continued approaching. At first it was just a creak, then closer, and finally a low whisper, like a voice that murmured in the wind. No one dared to move. We stood looking toward the edge of the forest, trying to distinguish some figure. But there was nothing visible, only the darkness that enveloped us. Suddenly, one of the flashlights we had left near the backpacks began to flicker. Marina, who was closer, took a step back, scared. "What is happening?" she asked with a trembling voice. Without warning, the flashlight fell to the ground and went out. It was as if something invisible had decided to turn it off. Then a gust of wind, as sudden as it was strange, blew through the camp. The campfire flame flickered and almost went out. We looked at each other with eyes wide open, not knowing what to do. The feeling of being watched intensified, as if something was stalking us from the shadows. "Let us pack and get out of here," said Alexander finally. His voice sounded firm, but you could also hear the fear in it. No one discussed it. We all began to hurry, collecting what we could, but the backpacks moved by themselves. One of them slid a few meters before we could stop it. We tried to hold them, but every time we took one, something seemed to push it back. We did not know what to do. The creaking of branches was now closer, and the voices, though distant, seemed to surround us. They were whispers, unintelligible murmurs that slid through the wind. Fear was palpable, and we all wanted to get out of there. We did not know if what was happening was a product of our imagination, or if there really was something strange lurking in the forest. But the feeling of danger was undeniable. Finally, we decided to run away. We did not care about leaving everything behind. We just wanted to get to the car. When we began to walk quickly down the trail, the shadows seemed to follow us. We did not look back for a second. But hearing the footsteps approaching, I felt the cold sweat run down my back. Something was chasing us, and although we did not know what it was, we knew we could not stay there. We managed to reach the car, but the atmosphere remained tense. When we started the engine and began to drive away, we heard for the last time that whisper clearer than ever, as if someone was telling us, "You should not have come." That night when we returned to the city, we did not talk much. Each of us was assimilating what had happened, but we knew that something had followed us from the mountain. What happened in that forest has no logical explanation, but deep down, we all knew that we had not been victims of our imagination. Something was stalking us there in the darkness, and we never talked about that place again. After that night, my perspective on legends and the inexplicable changed completely. Sometimes, when the night is calm and the wind blows, I feel as if something is watching us from the shadows. And I know that although time passes, that feeling will never leave me. The return to the city was silent. Each of us had our mind clouded by what had happened, but no one dared to say anything out loud. There was something in the air that kept us quiet, as if talking about what happened could make it more real. And none of us wanted to face that reality. The journey in the car was long and silent. We did not know if it was because of accumulated fatigue or because of fear, but we did not say a word during the return trip. The roar of the engine and the sound of the wind were the only things that could be heard, as if the whole world had decided to silence us. When we finally arrived in the city, the lights and the crowd welcomed us with a strange feeling, as if we were returning from another world. But the fear was still there, persistent, installed in each of us. Not even the hustle and bustle of the city managed to dispel it. Days passed, and with them I tried to forget it. We returned to our routines, to our daily lives, work, university, outings with friends. Everything seemed to return to normal. However, the shadows of the mountain never completely moved away. From time to time, the image of darkness in the forest invaded me, and the sound of footsteps and whispers echoed in my head. Charles, who used to be the most relaxed of the group, began to avoid conversations about the trip. Every time the topic came up, he would change the conversation quickly or simply get up from the table. Marina, meanwhile, could not stop looking around when she went out at night, as if she expected something or someone to be watching her from the darkness. The worst of all was Alexander. He, the most skeptical of all, who had always rejected any kind of supernatural explanation, seemed to have changed. He did not talk much, but when he did, his tone was different. There was a kind of tension in his voice, a concern that was not there before the trip. At night, he would call me, sometimes saying he could not sleep well, that he felt something strange in the air. Sometimes, he even said he had heard footsteps outside his apartment. What worried me most was that I also began to have those same symptoms. The feeling of being watched, that same feeling we had in the forest, began to haunt me. Some nights, when I closed my eyes, I felt as if I was back in the mountain, in the darkness, surrounded by that invisible presence. I heard the same whispers, those murmurs that I never fully understood. A month after the incident, I decided to visit Alexander. He lived in a small apartment, away from the city center. When I arrived, I was surprised how dim everything was. There were no lights on, and the window was closed, as if he was trying to prevent sunlight from entering. Through the glass, I saw him sitting in his armchair, staring into space. I knocked on the door softly, and at first there was no response. I knocked again and finally heard his soft but tense voice. "Come in." Upon entering, the air was dense, as if the place had not been ventilated in days. Alexander was there, but his face was not the same. There was something in his look, something that made me feel uncomfortable, as if he was no longer himself. "How are you?" I asked, trying to sound natural. He did not respond immediately. His gaze remained fixed on some distant point. "Have you had trouble sleeping?" I asked, remembering the nights when he had told me he heard footsteps. In the end, I could not help saying what I had been thinking for a long time. "Do you think everything that happened in the mountain, what we heard, was real?" Alexander slowly raised his gaze, and for a moment I saw in his eyes a deep fear. "I do not know, Luke, but there is something that does not leave me in peace, something that has not left me since that night." I sat in the armchair in front of him. "What do you mean?" "Since I returned, something strange has been happening. I cannot explain it, but I feel that something is looking for me," he said, and his voice trembled slightly. I got up and approached the window. The sun was beginning to set, tinting the sky orange, but I did not feel at peace. Alexander was right. Something was not right, and the worst thing was that we could not explain it. The next day, I decided to talk to Charles and Marina. The three of us met in the park, on a bench we used to frequent, a place we went to vent when we were younger. We were all restless, as if something in the air was pressing us. No one wanted to speak first, but finally it was Charles who broke the silence. "Have you also felt that something follows us?" he asked, looking at both of us with a seriousness he had never shown before. "Because I do feel it, and I cannot stop thinking about it." Marina nodded, her face pale. "It is as if something is waiting, as if it is always close following us, but we can never see it." That night I could not sleep. I thought about everything we had lived, about what we had experienced in the mountain. We all felt the same, although we did not know what it was exactly. Maybe fear had left a mark on us, an invisible mark that would never disappear. I decided to investigate the history of that mountain, looking for any clue that could give me some answer. I went to the local library and searched about the Cascade Mountains. What I found did not give me peace. In the old records, there was talk of inexplicable disappearances, of travelers who never returned from those lands, and of nearby towns that avoided approaching the area, because they said something strange occurred there. In an old article, I read something that made me stop completely. The Mountain of the Whisper. Those who dare to venture too deep feel that something follows them, that something watches them from the shadows. Some say they are the spirits of the ancient inhabitants, others that they are beings that inhabit the forest, invisible to the eyes of men. But what they all agree on is that if you hear the whisper, you must never respond. That article, dated more than 50 years ago, spoke of something we could not fully understand at the time. The whisper, something that seemed to be not just a noise, but a warning. Since that night, things have not been the same. The whispers, although we no longer hear them so clearly, are still present. There are nights when I feel that something is waiting in the darkness, waiting for us to return to the mountain. Although I try to ignore it, I know that feeling will never leave me. And although now I try to live my life normally, every time I walk alone at night, the air seems to become denser, as if the shadows are stalking me. And always, in the back of my mind, the whisper is still there, reminding me of what I saw in that mountain. Something I should never have heard, something that now knows my name. Good evening, folks. My name is Marcus. I've been making a living with paint and small repairs ever since my divorce. Because bills come every month and paint doesn't buy itself. When someone told me about a newly bought mansion by some out-of-towner named Mr. Aristides, I agreed without haggling over price. High daily rate, lunch included, cash in hand. I arrived early with Tony, my helper. The iron gate creaked, revealing a large construction. Warped wooden windows, paint peeling in sheets. It seemed to have been stuck in time for years. Before we could ask anything, Aristides himself came to meet us, straw hat pulled low over his forehead. He offered fresh brewed coffee and toast on the griddle. Boss who cooks for painters. I found it strange, but accepted. Better not refuse kindness when the pantry runs empty. While we ate, he watched us like someone taking inventory of tools. He asked where I was from, if I had kids, if I studied. I answered somewhat awkwardly. Too much curiosity from someone we just met usually has a price. Then he handed us 2 brand new extension cords and asked us to start with the facade. I scraped the first wall and noticed dark moisture stains that formed crooked drawings, resembling a nameless map. A light smell of wet wood came from there, even with the sun beating down. I kept that in mind. Infiltration usually turns into complaints. Around noon, he brought pots to the backyard, black beans and rice, collard greens. He served our plates as if he were family. Said his daughter Yara preferred not to appear because she was reserved. Seemed like a ready excuse, but I let it slide. We returned to work with full stomachs. Adjusting the ladder, I saw Aristides standing a few meters behind, hands on his waist, observing the house in silence, eyes somewhat lost. When he noticed I was looking, he smiled quickly and went inside. Before we left, he gave us bags of groceries, oil, rice, crackers. Distribute to whoever needs it, he said. Tony grabbed 2 without shame. I accepted one, but found it weird. Generosity like that, without warning, usually comes with a bill later. On the way back, Tony talked about how good this job was, where the boss feeds and still gives gifts. I nodded so as not to seem ungrateful, but I kept thinking about every detail. The house that smells like stagnant water, the ghost daughter, the boss who asks too many questions. Maybe it was just concern from a widowed father. Maybe not. Tomorrow I'll be back there early. If something goes wrong, I'll notice. I returned the next morning, with that weird feeling that the house was studying me back. I barely pushed the gate, and there was already the smell of strong coffee in the air. Mr. Aristides received me with a tired smile and news. He wanted me, besides painting, to help set up some tables in the main hall. He was going to receive old residents for a thank you lunch. I couldn't refuse. Double pay area. While dismantling scaffolding, I noticed that the stains I had scraped yesterday had returned, wide, wet, even without a drop of rain during the night. I applied sealer twice. The paint still dripped. Before noon, 2 pickup trucks arrived loaded with grocery bags. Neighborhood folks formed a line to the sidewalk. Aristides distributed packages like a politician on election day, calling each one by name. I don't know how he memorized so quickly. An old lady left crying, saying it had been months since she'd seen milk at home. Between handshakes, I felt a strange smell stuck to him, something mixed of burnt rubber and old incense. I smiled out of politeness, but held my breath whenever he got too close. Tony whispered that I should ask about the daughter because, according to the baker, she was a pretty girl who doesn't leave her den. I laughed, changed the subject, continued painting the beam. Later, however, I saw a silhouette behind the upstairs room curtain, straight hair at shoulder length, arms crossed. When I raised my hand in greeting, the curtain closed suddenly. Shortly before sunset, the entire community was already calling Aristides a saint. They sang an improvised happy birthday, clapped. He thanked with his head down, like someone carrying weight on his shoulders. Then he told me to save 2 extra bags for needy neighbors. I put the merchandise in the truck bed, and noticed he was talking to himself near the garden, with his back turned, hands intertwined. I thought of alcohol or fatigue, but his way of standing seemed more like a plea for help than madness. When it was time to leave, the gate got stuck. I forced it until it opened. I froze when I saw that the iron bar was hot, as if it had been in the sun all day. But since noon, the sky remained covered. I let go quickly and hid my hand in my pockets so as not to alarm Tony. In the rearview mirror, the freshly painted facade already showed dark veins running down the wall. The urge was to turn around, charge for what I did, and disappear. But easy money doesn't appear every day. I convinced myself that infiltration has a fix and bad smell disappears with a bath. I'm just not sure if it really goes away. Mr. Aristides caught me in the patio before the 3rd day dawned. Said a supplier would arrive at 6 in the morning, so it would be good for me to sleep there to receive the boxes. I replied that I had my son at home that night. He grabbed my shoulder with surprising strength for someone so thin. Said he would pay me double daily rate again and send a driver to take whatever I needed to get. I hesitated but gave in. Money weighs more than comfort when rent is near. Yara appeared on the porch while I was taking my backpack from the truck bed. She didn't say anything, just turned, leaving the door open. Inside, the house smelled of fresh cleaning product mixed with that burnt rubber smell that never went away. She showed me a small room in the back, simple bed, starched sheet. She tried to smile, but her eyes seemed exhausted. I saw dark circles, as if she hadn't slept for days. I wanted to strike up a conversation, thank and understand if everything was okay, but she just shook her head and left. Right after dinner, rice, pot roast, and heavy silence, Aristides asked me to accompany him to the garden. He took a weak flashlight, pointing soot stains on the trunks. Said he wasn't sure if they were fungi or something else. I asked what would be something else. He opened his mouth to answer, but stood staring at the darkness between the trees, pupils dilated, as if he saw someone. I waved the flashlight. I saw nothing but tall grass. Before I tried again, he murmured that he was going to retire. I stayed there for a few more minutes trying to understand if it was my paranoia, or if the night was indeed too stuffy despite the breeze. I returned inside, locked the room door, lay down dressed. I took a while to fall asleep. Every time drowsiness came, a distant noise, light dragging like a chair on tile, woke me up. I looked at my cell phone, almost 3. I breathed deeply, convincing myself that old house is there anyway. Tin wood, nails complain. When I finally passed out, I woke up not knowing the time, breathless, because the bed shook under my weight. It seemed like someone shaking the bed frame from bottom to top, irregular rhythm, like an attempt to get attention. I sat up with a jump, complete silence. The weak lamp illuminated only half the room. The other side plunged into a closed darkness, the kind the eye doesn't get used to. I ran my hand on the nearest switch. Bulb burned with a dry crack. I opened the door slowly, dark corridor. Living room lights were off. I called low, "Mr. Aristides." Nothing. I went to the kitchen feeling the wall, trying to make noise. At the corridor turn, I felt the smell of burnt meat, mixed with sickness, heavy like hot breath. I held back nausea, advanced to the pantry. The only clarity came from the street, filtered through the broken blind. Then something passed behind the table. I only saw a shape blacker than pitch, wide, tall, irregular contour of shoulders, without distinguishable head. Instinct was to back up, hit my back on the refrigerator. I blinked to make sure. The shape had disappeared, but the air remained dense, almost sticky. I heard creaking in the ceiling, dragged steps on the boards above. I thought of calling Yara, but the fear of scaring her locked me up. I felt ashamed of playing brave and ending up looking crazy. I ran back to the room, locked the door with a chair, rested my forehead on my knee, breathing slowly, remembering all the prayers forgotten since childhood. The smell insisted, even with the window open. I took time, but the day cleared, and at the first ray I heard knocking at the gate. I unlocked, heart beating hard. It was the freight truck driver. I received the boxes, signed trembling paper. When I turned, Aristides was on the porch smiling tired, as if nothing had happened. I barely touched him to deliver the note. I noticed the odor now came directly from his skin, strong, undisguised. He thanked me for the companionship and warned that Yara would prepare coffee. Only then did I notice that my hands were shaking so much that the receipt was illegible. I countered with an excuse of urgent commitment. I needed to get out quickly. I would get extra paint. He felt it, but his eyes stayed glued to mine a second longer than normal, as if he were seeing the fear in my face. I got in the truck with the impression that the entire seat smelled of that smoke that didn't even exist in there. I slammed the door, put it in first, and while accelerating, promised myself to return only during the day. Never again carry a sheet from here. I drove half an hour without destination, just to see the mansion shrink in the rearview mirror. I washed my face at a gas station, but the burnt stench remained stuck in my throat. I repeated to myself that headless shadow and shaking bed are dawn hallucination, but the stomach didn't believe. I left my son at school, made up to my mother that the work had delayed, and returned determined to finish the job under clear sun, get payment, and disappear. Gate wide open, silence of closed church. I took rollers and Ken's hitting foot on the floor. Nobody answered. I found Yara kneeling on newspaper, mixing dry herbs, purple dark circles on the forearm, scars in circles. "Is everything okay?" I asked. She said her father had gotten worse at dawn, vomiting something thick and black, and burned it in the yard to take away the smell. She showed a pot with sticky residue. I suggested calling a doctor. She denied. Doctor doesn't solve, she whispered, looking at the corridor. He thinks charity pays debt, but the accounts don't balance. Debt? Before I asked, she rolled up her sleeve and showed the scar ring. Healer's protection worked until Daddy canceled. Yesterday, he woke me up saying the collectors came back. I saw only my reflection. He saw 3 shadows behind me. I asked to see him. Stuffy room, door ajar, Aristides sitting on the edge of the bed. Shirt stuck with sweat, purple gums without teeth. The smell mixed rust and burnt rubber. What you saw is not imagination, he murmured. I made a pact when I bought cattle in the mountains. Money came, but blood's signature doesn't tear. They charge more when I try to do good. He coughed. The tissue came out stained black. I asked what he wanted. Take Yara. They're already walking through the rooms, licking the wall. If she stays, they'll taste her too. I promised to come back with the truck. In the corridor, Yara held a bag of groceries. She said she would pack before sunset and asked me not to leave her alone at night. I agreed, but fear spoke loud. How to explain to my family that I would bring a stranger with the smell of soot? Already at the gate, Aristides called my name, voice of candle going out. If you fail, they'll go after your boy. I froze on the spot. I didn't need to look to know he saw something behind me. The next morning, I was still trying to decide between running away with Yara or protecting my son, when Mr. Aristides announced a barbecue for the retirement elderly. It would be final thanks before the trip, he said. The word final bristled my arm, but I helped set up tables in the yard. I wanted to watch everything closely. About 30 old folks came, canes scratching beaten earth. Yara served juice. I turned skewer over the coals while soot rose from charcoal as if it sprouted from the ground. Aristides walked among the tables, bent and smiling, distributing brown paper envelopes stuffed with bills. Each elderly person raised their hands in praise, but on his face dripped black sweat that stained the tablecloth. When the meat was almost ready, the sky clouded in a breath. The breeze turned hot air coming from below, bringing gray particles that spun only there. Then I heard a deep, long moo without direction. An old lady squeezed my arm. Did you hear that, Bull? I nodded. The sound repeated louder. The smoke thickened near the fence, forming muscular back, 4 wide paws. In place of the head, just a nighttime void. The animal slid, leaving charred grass with each step. Get inside now, I shouted. The voice came out weak, throat locked by the burnt rubber stench. Canes beat, chairs fell. While I pushed people to the corridor, I saw Aristides motionless before the creature like a debtor facing the collector. The bull rose, and from the old man's skin gushed smoke that joined the black body, thickening it. He staggered, but stayed on his feet. It's paid. Leave my daughter, he murmured. The entity advanced. The ground creaked like cracking wood. Before it swallowed the old man, it turned the void in place of the head to me. A force I couldn't see pushed me against the wall. Air was lacking. Yara screamed my name distant. Glass burst in the upstairs room. Old folks prayed in leather. I thought of my son waiting for the bus. I gathered strength, pulled Yara by the wrist, and we ran. In the escape, I saw the bull dissolve into whirlwind, sucking the dark sweat from Aristides now on his knees. Each breath of his sounded like negotiation. I dragged Yara to the truck. She sobbed that she couldn't leave her father, but her fingers left soot on my arm. I started the engine and took off. 3 blocks later, I stopped breathless, and Yara rested her forehead on the glass. "You saw, right?" I nodded, lungs still burning. It wasn't sick man's delirium, it was collection. And now my name might have been added to the debt. I went back mentally to the day before. Aristides had insisted that serving meat was a sign of abundance, that God would note the gesture. I realized too late that he was trying to settle overdue installments in public payments. The stains that devoured the walls now appeared on the yard floor. Dark circles, shiny, like oil frying on cement. We stepped and the shoes creaked, but nobody besides me seemed to notice. When the moo sounded for the 3rd time, even the birds disappeared from the mango trees. The air stopped. Flies that circled the roasted meat dropped dead on the table. An old lady dropped her plate. Pieces of cassava rolling seemed absurdly sharp in that heavy silence. I tried to pull Aristides by the arm, begging him to enter, but he didn't turn. He stared at the bull like someone recognizing a distant relative. The stain on his forehead thickened, a dark drop fell, hissed on the coals, spreading the smell of burnt tire and rancid tallow. It was this odor that made me vomit before regaining sense. Yara fought with 2 stubborn old folks who wanted to collect the scattered envelopes. I had to kick the money away, remembering that no paper is worth it when air lacks in the lungs. I stayed 2 hours stopped on the street, trying to convince Yara to go straight to a hotel, but she insisted on seeking help before night fell. We ended up knocking on the door of Miss Rita, a healer who lives on a lot with herb garden and peeling blue walls. She answered alone, looked at me, then at Yara and only asked, "Did the smell come with you?" Didn't even wait for an answer. She told us to enter, lit charcoal in a punctured can, and threw rue, lavender, dry pieces of some bitter bark. The smoke rose white, then grayish, and for an instant seemed to pull a dark thread from Yara's wrist. "This is not common curse," Rita murmured, holding her arm with just 2 fingers. "It's blood debt. Who owed doesn't have strength anymore." I explained everything I could in a rush, headless bull included. The old woman opened the Bible to a psalm, but closed it soon, as if the page wasn't enough. She asked for a gallon of coarse salt, red thread, and oil lamp. It didn't take long, and neighborhood residents were already bringing the material. Gossip runs faster than siren. We returned to the mansion in convoy. The yard seemed to have breathed soot. Black stains marked each footprint we left. Rita stuffed handfuls of salt in her pockets and drew a circle on the living room tile, mixing salt, coffee powder, and ash. She told Yara to sit inside, straight back, hands on lap. I held the oil lamp at the door. "Nobody breaks this line, whatever it costs," she warned. Her voice sounded firm, but her hands trembled. She began low prayer, Portuguese mixed with old words I didn't understand. The air, which was already stuffy, became viscous. The smell of burnt gasoline spread so fast that my eyes watered. The oil lamp shook in my hand. Glass cracked inside without bursting. The wick went out, although the oil was still there. There followed silence that sucked even the sound of the heart itself. Then, as if someone spilled ink in a transparent bucket, a black and thick thing dripped from the ceiling, dripped over the salt circle, and began to spin on itself, slow, forming whirlpool at the height of Miss Rita's back. She raised her voice but choked. Dry cough twisted again until a dark cloud came out of her mouth. She staggered, trying to cross the line, but the powder turned mud under her feet. I ran to pull her, but Rita stretched her arm, blocking my movement. Her eyes seemed to ask, "Don't enter." Even so, I crossed the line an inch. I felt my skin burn as if I had touched a lit stove. Rita fell to her knees. The cloud dove into her bent back and disappeared like smoke sucked by exhaust. She gasped, pulling air that seemed not to exist. The voice became whisper, cut the rest, and fainted in my arms. I carried Rita outside and the collective behind. In the corridor, I noticed that the salt stains scattered on the floor bubbled like hot fat, releasing dry snaps. The circle was open in two black cracks that advanced like crack in glass. I put Rita in the bed of a neighbor's pickup. Her chest rose little. Each exhalation released a gray breath. While they started the engine, Yara squeezed the rosary so tight that the beads hurt her fingers, but no prayer came out. When the car started, I felt the entire yard vibrate as if the ground had swallowed thunder. I looked back. Over the roof escaped thin streams of black smoke, many resembling snakes climbing the moonless sky. What if that decided to follow Rita's trail to the hospital? What if, by failing with Aristides, it came directly after me? Suddenly, the only clear thought was my son leaving school, backpack bigger than his back, crossing the crosswalk without imagining. I ran to the truck and Yara got in together, still clutching the rosary. She said she needed to see her father, but I could only think of getting home before the sun died completely. I started. As we moved away, I noticed that in the rearview mirror, the house seemed to breathe. Grimy windows inflated and deflated in a slow rhythm, exhaling a dark vapor that erased the end of the street. For the first time, I felt that the debt had passed due, and now charged interest on anyone who dared to intervene. I drove like a bandit fleeing the police, but the smoke seemed to stick to the rearview mirror. I arrived at my mother's house before classes ended. I breathed relieved to see my boy kicking bottle cap in the yard. I told him to enter, close doors, and not turn the TV loud. I made up breakdown at work. Any excuse sticks when the smell of burnt tire still escapes through the collar. Before everything, I went to the room where he played. He was on the floor, concentrated, drawing on crumpled paper. I knelt beside him and he showed me the work. A giant stick figure with gloves. "This is you, Dad, the goalkeeper." I hugged him tight, feeling the good smell of crayon and childhood, a clean smell. For that instant, the soot stench that chased me seemed to retreat. It was for that piece that I needed to face whatever was out there. Yara sat on the kitchen bench, cold hands wrapping the teacup my mother served. She was quiet, eyes fixed on the drain grate, as if she feared something would rise from there. I didn't have the courage to explain to my mother why I had brought that pale girl. I just asked to prepare a guest room and avoid questions. When it got dark, the street corner gained thick fog despite the heat. It's not usual fog there. My younger brother, who lives in the back, appeared clapping and pulled me aside. "There's something strange with your cows." I went to throw feed, and they're all huddled in the corner, as if they had seen the bigger animal. A taste of iron rose through my throat. I took a flashlight and followed. The barn was 50 meters from the back of the house, weak light from a hanging bulb. As soon as I opened the door, I felt the smell not of barn, but the same burnt rubber stench that impregnated Aristides. The 3 dairy cows breathed short, white eye turned up. In the middle of the straw, a new, perfect soot circle marked the ground. Inside it, the little calf my son adored trembled, so much it seemed to want to disappear in its own skin. The flashlight failed twice. In the last flash, I saw the silhouette of the headless bull compact in the penumbra, occupying the space where air should be. I wanted to run, but Aristides' voice echoed in the dark, hoarse like dragged stone. "Marcus pays when is enough." "Where are you, sir?" I spun, but saw nobody. The black form advanced half a step. Floor squeaked like green wood breaking. The little calf whimpered sharp. I understood. So they didn't want Aristides. They didn't want Yara. They wanted balance adjustment. Innocent flesh in place of old debt. I stood still, heart racing, trying to rationalize if delivering an animal would solve or open the bigger door. The black bull raised front paws. The calf collapsed. I felt the choice tear inside me. Spare my family now and maybe chain it later. I gave a shout that mixed order and plea. The silhouette retreated millimeters. I tried to bargain. I enter in his place. Take me. Heavy silence, followed by hot breath that turned off the flashlight completely. The little calf stopped shaking. I felt the smell of burnt hair, although there was no fire. I spun and left stumbling, because something inside warned that I was a breath away from sealing my own destiny, and there would be no guarantee they would stop there. I came back running home. Yara and my son were in the living room, light off, just street glow. My mother prayed low in the pantry. I locked the door, rested my forehead on the wood. "They want blood," I murmured. She already knew. She rested her hand on my arm, wet and cold, like wrung cloth. "If I go back, maybe they'll stop," she whispered, "but I don't have strength to face alone." I realized late that the choice wasn't just mine. Save the life I put in the world, or save someone for whom I began to feel something too big to name. I looked at my son drawing on the table, without understanding the weight that fell on the roof. I promised him that nothing bad would enter there. I wasn't sure if it was true. Later, the fog thickened in the yard. Dark forms circled beyond the fence in a hurry, like hunters after wounding prey. With each turn they tore the air with deep moo, reminding that the bill eventually comes for everyone. I stopped in front of the door, key in hand, aware that the next decision would cut my ribs from inside. Either deliver the calf, and who guarantees that later they wouldn't ask for another? Or cross that fog willing to burn along with Aristides and what remained of the debt? My brother insisted that I call the police or a veterinarian, but explaining headless bull charging pact would yield internment, not help. I spent the dawn in the living room, window ajar, watching the fog that circled like dogs sniffing the gate. Yara dozed on the sofa, rosary wrapped around her wrist. My son slept in the back room, hugging a worn pillow. Between the three of us, there was only wood, brick, and the promise I made to protect him. Promise that sounded empty every time the distant moo vibrated in the glass. When the clock struck 4 in the morning, I understood that the debt wouldn't return to pasture, nor follow Miss Rita. It would stay spinning around who remained, me, Yara, and what we represented to each other. I got up, took the truck key and a fuel gallon I keep for the generator. Yara woke with a start. "I'm going to finish this." I spoke low, voice firmer than I felt. She wanted to come, I denied. I left phone within reach in case something broke the door. Before leaving, I observed my boy. Calm breathing, innocence intact for little. I promised silently that I would return before first class, even without believing. The road was empty, sky still dark. Missing 500 meters, I felt the smell of burnt tire inside the cabin, sign that the mansion breathed soot like chimney. I stopped at the gate, turned off headlights, got out with gallon and lighter. The entire yard flickered in a glow of live coal. In the center, Mr. Aristides kneeling, clothes stuck with black sweat, head hanging like exhausted bull in corral. Around him, 12 circular marks, equal to those in the barn, pulsed dark sparks. The silhouette of the headless bull went from circle to circle, absorbing smoke that gushed from the old man's pores, fattening each time it completed the turn. I advanced in short steps, gallon hitting knee, deciding whether to speak or just act. Aristides raised his face, lost eyes, but lucid enough to recognize who arrived. "I thought you were going to betray me," he whispered, scratched voice. "Come negotiate." "I didn't come to end this," he laughed. Cough became black vomit on the lawn. The bull stopped. It stared at us with that nothing where there should be head. I felt pressure in chest, as if air transformed into sand. I unscrewed the gallon cap. I breathed deep. The plan was crude. Burn the house until it became pile of ashes. Without shell, maybe the debt would lose shelter. While pouring fuel on the porch steps, Aristides groaned. "The wood is not the target, it's me." "Then get out of the way." He dragged his body to the door, blocking it. "Let them take me, but spare the girl." The last word came out in a snap, like rope breaking. The bull advanced, hoofs sinking in the floor. The porch squeaked like firewood in the fireplace. I shook so much I almost dropped the lighter. In that second, I realized that if I burned everything there, the old man would burn. Immediate definitive payment. But what about Yara? What about the trail this thing might follow to my house? I looked at Aristides. There was no longer man there, just the rest of a man holding a blood debt. He himself knew. He pressed his hand to his chest, caught breath and spoke, "Strike now, while they eat from me." It wasn't my heroism, it was desperation. I struck. Blue flame cracked, licked the railing greased with soot. The bull retreated 2 steps, dry moo vibrating in the roof. Fire climbed fast, as if the house had been greased with oil for years. Glass burst. Black smoke mixed with flames, generating blazes that seemed to chew air. Aristides didn't scream. Leaning against the jamb, he let himself be embraced by the glow. When the roof gave way with crash, I distinguished a breath of relief in his expression. Or it was my guilt wanting to find meaning. I retreated, stumbling the heat, throwing labyrinth in ears. The silhouette of the bull tried to form beyond the flames, but unraveled in threads that wind carried toward the woods. There was no more fertilizer for that fear. I ran to the truck breathless, tunnel of smoke behind. The sun began to rise, tinging everything dirty orange. In the rearview mirror, the mansion became isolated bonfire with nobody to put out. The smell of burnt rubber decreased with each kilometer. It didn't disappear completely, but became weak echo, memory of debt settled in haste. I reached my yard before 7, and Yara was waiting on the threshold, face swollen from crying. I only told her that her father rested and that the smoke seemed to have gone along. She understood, but her sadness didn't fit in any word. My son hugged me without knowing why. His shirt smelled of childhood, not soot. It was only then that I noticed the silence. No moo, no crack in the roof, just the common morning bird singing banal subject. Now I tell this story because I need to tell someone who won't call me a liar. The house burned entirely. Only crooked chimney remained, however. Sometimes, I still feel the air get heavy when I think too much about the subject. Maybe it's just late fear. Maybe it's warning that debt can even disappear. But fear stays. Just in case, I keep coarse salt behind doors and sleep with corridor light on. I know I was flawed, hesitated, almost delivered another life in exchange for my peace. No hero here, just a father who since that day holds breath whenever he smells barbecue in the neighborhood and prays that wind brings nothing but smoke. My name is Edward, and that autumn afternoon when I decided to take a hike in the mountains, I never imagined it would become an experience that would change how I see the world forever. My life had never been filled with grand adventures, but I had always enjoyed walks through the countryside, the tranquility of the forest, the clean mountain air. I thought a stroll through the familiar trails of the Blue Ridge Mountains, near my hometown of Richmond, Virginia, would be the perfect excuse to escape the routine. However, what began as a simple hike ended up being something that haunts me to this day. It was a crisp day. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I decided to take the longer trail, a path that wound deep into the foothills of the mountains, away from the more traveled routes. The trail was narrow and serpentine between the trees, and only the whispers of leaves moved by the wind could be heard. The place had always given me a sense of peace. However, something about that day felt different, though I could not pinpoint exactly what it was. I began walking without hurry, enjoying the quietude of the place. There were other people on the trail, but they soon disappeared, and I found myself completely alone in the forest. As I climbed up a steep path, only the crunch of my boots on dry leaves and the distant sound of some birds accompanied me. Everything seemed perfect, absolute calm. At first, my mind wandered, thinking about my things, but after a while I began to notice something strange. I did not know how, but I felt that I was not alone. At first, I ignored it. It was just the mountain atmosphere, I thought. Perhaps some animal was approaching, or the wind was playing with the branches. But then I heard it. A sound of slow footsteps in the same direction as me. I stopped and looked back, but I saw nothing, only the empty forest with the shadow of trees extending over the path. Again, I started walking, ignoring the growing feeling of discomfort. The footsteps continued. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Maybe there was someone behind me or a hiker I had not seen. So I stepped off the trail a few meters to give space to whoever it was, waiting for them to catch up with me. But no one appeared. The trail remained empty, and the sound of footsteps continued accompanying me, now closer. My breathing quickened a little, but I tried to stay calm. I stopped again and looked back. Nothing. The silence of the forest enveloped me again as if there had never been anything. I thought I was exaggerating, that my mind was playing a trick on me, but the echo of those footsteps followed me. I decided I should keep going. If I stayed there, I was going to become paranoid. So I took a deep breath and began walking faster, trying to dispel the strange sensation. The sound of the footsteps seemed to match mine, as if someone was imitating them. From time to time, in moments of silence, I could hear leaves crunching behind me, as if someone was walking in the same rhythm as if they were following me. The mountains that normally gave me calm now seemed much larger, much darker. The distance between the trees lengthened, and the shadows seemed to move. I began to feel trapped. Every time I turned my head, I saw no one, but the feeling that someone was behind me did not disappear. Then, at a turn in the trail, I found myself in a small clearing. I decided to rest for a few minutes, sit on a rock, and drink water in hopes of calming my nerves. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them, I realized something that chilled my blood. The footprints of my boots on the ground, marked by dust and earth, were not the only ones on the ground. Next to them were smaller footprints, as if someone with lighter shoes had walked there, exactly in the same place where I had been. They were not old or recent, but they seemed to follow the same pattern as my steps. I felt as if someone was watching my every movement. My mind began to fill with dark thoughts, but I tried to calm myself. I thought maybe it was the wind or an animal, but looking around, nothing seemed familiar to me. I saw no signs of life, only the sound of wind among the leaves. The feeling of being watched did not fade. I decided to continue, though with growing unease. The trail continued steep and increasingly lonely, and as I walked, the footsteps behind me continued. Sometimes they seemed closer, other times more distant, but always there. My breathing was heavy now, and my legs began to hurt from the effort. I looked around hoping to find some sign that I was going crazy, but I found nothing. When I reached a curve in the trail, I decided to make one last stop. I took a deep breath and turned around again, looking back with more firmness than ever. The trail remained empty, but something in the atmosphere changed. The air became denser, the wind stopped blowing, and the silence was absolute. The footsteps continued ever closer. Suddenly, I felt something more. It was not just the footsteps, it was the presence of someone behind me, as if there was a figure sliding from shadow to shadow. Always at my back, always at the same distance. I felt a knot in my stomach, and it was at that moment when doubt ceased to be just paranoia. Something was not right. It could not be an animal. It could not be another hiker. Something or someone was following my steps with disturbing precision. I made the decision to turn around and run. I ran like never before in my life, without looking back, only listening to the sound of my steps and the crunch of branches under my feet. But I could not help hearing the footsteps behind me, faster, firmer, as if they were chasing me. My lungs burned, my body could take no more, but I did not dare stop. Fear drove me to continue without looking back. I ran until I saw the exit from the trail, where the light began to fade as the sun hid. Upon reaching the clearing, the presence disappeared. The footsteps ceased, the air seemed fresher and less dense. I breathed deeply and finally stopped. There was nothing. There was no one. Although I finally left the trail, I could not shake the feeling that something had been there, following me, lurking in the shadows. I stayed in the clearing a few more minutes, watching the path I had run down, looking for any sign that would confirm what I had experienced. But I found nothing. That night I sat in front of the campfire at the campsite trying to calm myself, but something would not leave me in peace. Sometimes, when the stars shine above, I feel that I still hear those footsteps behind me, like a distant echo that refuses to fade. I do not know if what I lived was just a product of my mind, of the loneliness of the trail and nature, or if somehow there was something beyond, something that is still there lurking among the trees. After that experience, I never walked that trail again. The mountains are still there, as beautiful as always, but I no longer look at them with the same eyes, because I know that in the silence of the loneliest trails, sometimes we are not as alone as we believe. After that night, the feeling of having been followed in the mountain never completely faded. Although I tried to rationalize it and think that it was just my mind playing tricks, every time I was near nature again, the fear would resurface, as if something dark was still waiting for me. But the most disturbing thing was what happened days later, when the reality of what I had lived reached me in an unexpected way. At first I tried to continue with my life normally, but every time I thought about my excursion, the memories returned. The footprints on the trail, the sound of footsteps behind me, the feeling of not being alone. I decided not to share what I had lived with anyone. I knew that people would think that, like many others, I had been a victim of the loneliness and paranoia of the mountains. However, something in me told me that what I lived was real. As real as the feeling that when walking on those trails, there was still something or someone there watching me. Some weeks passed, and finally a lifelong friend, James, invited me to go out to the countryside again, this time to a different trail. I knew that something inside me resisted, but he convinced me, saying it was an easy walk without complications. I decided to go. Maybe I needed to confront my fears, overcome it somehow. After all, how could I be so sure of what had happened on that excursion if I did not face it again? So I made the decision to accompany him. This new trail had nothing to do with the Blue Ridge Mountains or the mountains from the other time. It was shorter and less demanding, ideal for a relaxed walk. When we arrived, the landscape was so different from what I had experienced that time. It was a familiar place, full of small bushes and scattered rocks, without the same density of trees that had surrounded me before. And yet, as we went deeper into the trail, fear began to grow again. The fresh air did not seem as pleasant as before. Every step I took on the rocks made me remember the dry footsteps I had heard. Branches moving with the wind made me think of that disturbing sound of footsteps behind me. I tried to ignore it, to enjoy the walk as James was doing, chatting about everything and nothing, but I could not. At one point, while we were walking, I heard something. It was not footsteps behind me, but to one side among the bushes. It was a soft sound, but enough to make me stop dead. James did not notice it. He was too busy talking about some random topic, but I was alert. It was another animal, a bird. But I could not shake the feeling that something was not right. I looked toward the bush where the noise came from, but I saw nothing. I tried to calm myself, repeating that it was just an animal, that there was nothing to worry about. However, something inside me kept saying otherwise. I was not alone. My skin tensed, my senses sharpened. I could feel a presence in the air, something in the environment that told me I could not be calm. James, seeing that I had stopped, asked me if everything was okay. Yes, of course. I just heard something, I replied, trying to hide the uneasiness that ran through me. I walked the rest of the way in silence, but something continued to weigh on me. As the afternoon progressed, and the shadows began to lengthen, something in the air became denser, as if the sun was extinguishing the light too fast, or as if darkness was rushing to arrive. Upon reaching a crossroads where the main path forked, something made me look back. I know I should not have done it, but somehow the need to look was stronger than my will. And there, on the trail we had come from, I saw something strange. There was a figure in the distance. I could not see it clearly, just a shadow at the end of the path, moving at the same speed as us. A shiver ran through me. My mind tried to rationalize it, but the image was clear. There was no one else on the trail, There were no people walking there, and yet that figure maintained the same distance, following us without moving away. I told James to wait and began walking toward the crossroads. As I approached the shadow, the figure began to fade, not like an illusion, but as if it had never been there. My breathing became agitated. I looked around, but the trail remained empty. There was nothing. James, seeing that I was behaving strangely, asked me if I was okay. I tried to stay calm. "Yes, I am fine. It is just the light, I think," I said without knowing how to justify what I had just seen. But James no longer seemed so convinced. I decided not to talk about it anymore. In the end, the rest of the trail was quiet, although the feeling of being watched never left me. Every creak, every movement among the trees seemed to be charged with a tension I could not explain. I was exhausted, but at the same time, my mind would not stop spinning trying to understand what was happening. That same night, after returning home, I could not sleep. The images of the excursion haunted my head, and the echoes of the footsteps returned to my mind, as clear as that time in the mountains. I decided to call James the next day to ask him if he had noticed anything strange, but in the end, I did not. I was afraid he would think I was losing my mind. However, deep down, I felt that something was behind all this. As the days passed, I began to review old photos from that first excursion. It was not that I thought I would find something revealing, but I had to know if what I had experienced had really happened or if it was a product of my mind. It was then that I saw something that chilled my blood. In one of the photos, taken in the clearing where I had rested, just in the background, almost imperceptible, there was a figure. I could not see it clearly, but in the blurred form, the figure was approaching too close to my position at that moment. Again, the feeling that I was not alone hit me with all its force. I did not know what to do with that image. I did not understand if it was an optical illusion, an error, or something deeper, something more sinister. But I could no longer deny that the feeling of being followed, of being constantly watched, was real. Maybe I would never know if someone or something was following me, but something inside me told me that the trail that day in the mountain was marked by something more than a simple walk. And although I tried to forget it, the shadow that stalked me never left. Every time I pass through those types of places, I no longer feel the same calm. The mountains, the roads, and the trails now have something more in them, something I cannot explain or fully understand. And although my mind tells me that maybe it is just me who sees the shadows, I cannot help feeling that what I lived was real, and that somehow the shadows have never completely gone away. I am David, 38 years old, and like many who live in the city, my life had become a monotonous and suffocating routine. The pressure of work, daily problems, and the constant feeling of being trapped had worn me down in such a way that I began to lose myself. I felt that the noise and lights of the city were swallowing me, and I could not remember when was the last time I felt truly at peace. It was on one of those sleepless nights, with my mind spinning restlessly, when I made a decision that would change everything. I decided I needed to escape, even if only for a few days, from everything that overwhelmed me. I looked for something that would allow me to disconnect, a place where the noise of the world could not reach me. It was then that I thought of the mountains. The mountains had always been a mystery to me. It is not that I was a nature lover, far from it, but something about the idea of climbing to such a high and remote place attracted me. The mountains seemed to offer what the city could not give me: space, silence, fresh air, a retreat to calm my mind. I chose a mountain that was a few hours from the city. It was not one of the most famous or the most dangerous, but it was lonely enough to allow me to be alone and at peace. I prepared myself with the basics: a backpack with some food, water, a flashlight, my cell phone, although I did not expect to have signal, and a coat in case the weather changed. I did not tell anyone where I was going, not my friends, not my family. I did not want them to interfere with my little escape. I took a bus to the nearest town, and from there I began walking toward the base of the mountain. The route was quiet at first, just a trail that wound through the forest. As I climbed, the landscape became more arid and less crowded. No one passed, no tourists, no hikers, not even animals. The peace I felt at first was what I was looking for most: the solitude of the mountain and the tranquility that invaded me with each step. Finally, I felt I could breathe. By mid-afternoon, I was quite high. The sun was beginning to descend, and I knew I could not continue much more if I wanted to find a good place to camp before it got dark. I found a small clearing near a stream where I decided to stay for that night. I set up my tent and prepared some food. The mountain was deserted, and although solitude enveloped me, it was a comforting solitude. I sat by the fire I had lit, watching the flames while thinking about everything I had left behind. For a moment, I felt as if the stress of the city and the pressures of life were fading away. I was alone, but at peace. That night, when I got into my sleeping bag and turned off the flashlight, the silence was absolute. The only sound was the gentle flow of the stream and the wind among the trees. I felt safe, isolated, as if I were out of reach of everything that worried me. But as darkness advanced, something changed. A small whisper, like a creak of branches, took me out of my thoughts. I thought it was some small animal, maybe a deer or a hare. I was so tired that I barely paid attention to it. I closed my eyes and let myself be carried away by sleep. However, around midnight, I was awakened by a louder noise. At first, I only heard it as a slight vibration in the ground, something like if someone was walking near my tent. The sound stopped as quickly as it began, but my heart began to beat faster. I got up cautiously and listened in the darkness. The wind had ceased, and only the sound of the stream broke the silence. But I was not alone. Something or someone had been there near my camp. Quickly, I took the flashlight and turned it on. I left the tent, but there was nothing more than the shadows of the forest and the murmur of water. I thought maybe I was imagining things. Maybe exhaustion and loneliness were affecting my mind. However, a strange sensation ran down my back as if something was watching me. I did not sleep again that night. I stayed awake, watching the shadows and listening to any sound that approached. The next morning, when the sun began to peek over the horizon, I began to pack my things. I decided it was not worth continuing. The feeling of discomfort was still there, and although I did not know what had happened, I preferred to go down and return to civilization. But when I started the descent, something made me stop. I found fresh footprints on the ground, near where I had set up the tent the night before. They were not animal footprints like the ones I had seen before. They were human footprints, large, heavy, like those of someone who had walked barefoot, and it was not something I could have overlooked. They were very close to my camp, as if someone had been watching me all night. My heart began to race. The idea that someone, maybe someone who lived in the mountains or who had simply gotten lost there, was nearby, made me feel vulnerable. I decided to quicken my pace, but every time I looked back, I felt that something was following me. The same feeling of being watched took hold of me. Every creak, every movement among the trees made me turn abruptly, but I saw nothing. Not a person, not an animal, nothing, just the wind moving the branches. The pressure of being in that situation grew. More and more, I convinced myself that I was not alone. Somehow, I knew that someone had been following me since the night before. I could not explain it, but I felt it in the air. I decided to speed up my pace, but my instinct told me I should be alert, that something was not right. Upon reaching the base of the mountain, I noticed something strange. A man was standing there, about 100 meters away between the trees. He did not move, but he was staring at me intently. His face was difficult to distinguish due to the distance and angle, but his posture was rigid, as if he had been there for hours. I said nothing. I did not know if he was a hiker or someone else lost in the mountains, but my body reacted before my mind. I began to walk faster, constantly looking over my shoulder, making sure the man did not move. The last thing I saw before losing sight of him was a figure that slid between the trees. He was not running, but his movement was strange, as if he was not walking naturally. The image stayed with me, and my instinct told me I should get out of there as soon as possible. When I finally reached the town, I no longer looked back. There was something about that man that chilled my blood. Something in his presence told me I did not want to know what he wanted from me or why he had been following me. I never returned to the mountain. And although people told me it was crazy to think I had been followed, something inside me knew it was not an accident, that there was someone in that mountain who was watching me and not out of curiosity. Since that day, the idea of escaping to the solitude of nature no longer attracts me. The mountain that seemed to offer peace only gave me a feeling of fear that I have not been able to get out of my head. And always, in every dark corner, I wonder if that figure is still looking for me. Several weeks passed since my experience in the mountain, but the feeling of being watched did not fade. Every time I passed near a forest or saw a mountain in the distance, my mind returned to that man among the trees, that strange figure who watched me without moving, as if he was waiting for me. Despite trying to rationalize it, to think that maybe it had simply been a coincidence, or that my mind had played a trick on me due to accumulated stress, I could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. I felt as if the mountain, that place I had sought to escape stress and find peace, had become a nightmare in my mind, and I was determined to clear all doubts. I returned to the town near the mountain, determined to talk to someone who could give me more information about what had happened. When I arrived, I went directly to the small cafe that was in the main square. It was a picturesque place with wooden tables and rustic decoration. No one seemed to know me, and the tranquility of the place allowed me to calm my thoughts, although the restlessness still haunted me. I approached the bar where an older man of about 60 years was serving coffee to some tourists. I approached him, and with a calm voice I asked him, "Excuse me, do you know anything about the people who usually go to the nearby mountains? It is just that the last time I was there I felt watched, as if someone was following me." The man looked at me with some curiosity before answering, as if he was weighing my words. "Watched," he repeated in a low tone. "Well, young man, the mountains here have been home to many stories, some very old. There are those who say that not everyone who goes up manages to return as they expect. Some people disappear." At first I thought he was joking or trying to give me advice about not venturing alone, but something in his tone made me listen more carefully. "Disappear?" I asked, more out of curiosity than fear. The man nodded slowly. "It is not common, but it has happened. Many years ago, a man was last seen near that same mountain. Nobody knows what happened to him. Some talk about a kind of hermit, someone who lives in the mountains, who has been there for generations. Nobody has seen him up close, but they say that some people get lost there and never return, as if something was stalking them." The coffee I had in my hands suddenly seemed too hot. I had trouble concentrating on the man's words while remembering the figure I had seen in the forest, the same one that had followed me unhurriedly, watching me from the shadows. And what happens to those people? Why has nobody done anything? I asked, trying to stay as calm as possible, but my voice trembled slightly. The man looked at me for a moment, as if he was evaluating whether he should tell me more. "Look, young man, the mountains are a peculiar place. Some people see them as a sacred place, others simply fear them. But there have always been rumors of someone or something that lives there watching those who venture too far. Maybe it is just a legend, but I would not risk investigating on my own." I felt a pressure in my chest, as if something heavy had settled in my stomach. The man's words echoed in my head, and although I tried to rationalize what he had told me, I could not help feeling that there was more than he was willing to tell. I left the cafe with my head full of thoughts and questions, but as I walked through the streets of the town, something told me I should return. I knew it could be a mistake, that everything I had lived could have been just the product of my tired mind. But something told me I could not leave things like that. Something inside me pushed me to return to that mountain and discover the truth. The next day I made the decision. I prepared my backpack again, this time with more provisions, and took the path to the mountain. The route seemed the same I had traveled weeks before, but everything felt different. The shadows between the trees seemed darker, and the air was colder than I remembered. The feeling of uneasiness accompanied me with every step. When I reached the place where I had set up my tent on my first trip, I felt a strange sensation of déjà vu. It was almost the same as before, the same clearing near the stream, the same sound of water, but something was wrong. There were no animals. There was no natural sound I had heard the first time, only the wind and the feeling of being watched. I looked around, but I saw nothing. I decided to set up my tent again, although fear was beginning to be stronger. I knew that if I did not discover what had happened, I could not rest. When night began to fall, I sat by the fire, but the warmth of the flames did not console me. My eyes constantly scanned the edge of the forest, looking for something, anything. As darkness took over the place, the sounds became more intense. It was not the creaking of branches by animals or the whisper of wind. It was something else, something closer. In the distance, I heard a soft thud, as if something had fallen to the ground. I immediately got up and pointed the flashlight toward the origin of the sound. There, in the twilight, I saw something that chilled my blood. It was a figure almost identical to the one I had seen weeks before. It was not a common man. It did not have clear features, but its shape was unmistakable. Its presence seemed even more disturbing because this time it was closer, more defined. It was about 20 meters from me among the trees, watching me. I tried to scream, but the words would not come out. It was as if my throat was closed by fear. I could not move. The figure did not move an inch, but I knew I was not alone. The feeling of terror enveloped me completely. Finally, the figure took a step toward me, a slow step, almost as if it was playing with my fear. But when its foot touched the ground, the sound of something breaking took me out of my paralysis. I turned to look around, and in that instant panic forced me to react. I ran toward the exit of the clearing without looking back, without worrying about anything else. I ran until I reached the base of the mountain. My legs hurt, but fear drove me. Upon reaching the town, the fresh afternoon air gave me momentary relief. I did not look back again, but a part of me knew that that figure had been following me all the time. I never returned to that mountain, nor did I even approach the town again. The feeling of being watched haunts me to this day. Although I try to rationalize it, the footprints, the noises, and that figure remain a mystery I can never solve. Now I know that the mountain was not the place to escape. It was a place where maybe I should never have been. My name is Jake Rodriguez, and I have been climbing mountains for more than 15 years. I am a professional mountaineer, and I have traveled from the Andes to the Alps, passing through the most remote peaks of Colorado. The mountain is my life. I feel it as a refuge, a place where the chaos of the world does not exist. For me, climbing a mountain is not just a physical challenge, but a way to find myself, to test my limits. However, what I lived in the Sierra Nevada, a small mountain range in Northern California, changed something inside me. Not only because of the fear I experienced, but because of the feeling that, although I do not want to admit it, I was closer to something I had never dared to imagine. The real danger, the one you cannot see, but that follows you. It was a day in early September. I decided to make an ascent to the summit of a lonely mountain that was in a little-known area of the Sierra. I had been several times in that region, but I had never ventured to that particular peak. The route was not signposted, which made it even more attractive to me. A solitary mountaineer looking for something I could not find on commercial routes. The day began early at 5 in the morning, when the sun was just beginning to illuminate the mountains. I knew the weather would be somewhat unpredictable, as usually happens at heights, but I was prepared. I took my backpack, checked the equipment, made sure I had enough water, food, and of course, my compass and map. I climbed along a trail that was more of a weak trace with loose stones and undergrowth that closed around my legs. The vegetation was dense, but in some sections, the view opened to impressive panoramas of the surrounding mountains. As I ascended, I felt that calm that only height can provide, an almost absolute silence interrupted only by the sound of wind and the crunch of stones under my boots. The ascent was long, longer than I had calculated, and I was surprised by how isolated I felt. Although deep down I always look for that kind of solitude, at that moment, something did not feel right. It was not fatigue or altitude, but a kind of oppression in the air. Every time I looked around, I saw no animals or traces of other hikers. The terrain was arid, lifeless, as if I was walking on a surface that had been forgotten by time. Finally, after several hours, I reached the summit. The view was spectacular. Everything around me extended in a vast ocean of mountains and valleys, with the sun shyly peeking between the clouds, projecting long shadows over the landscape. The air was colder, but the feeling of achievement was indescribable. I sat on a large rock and took out my water thermos. Everything seemed calm. However, while resting, something caught my attention. In front of me, on the ground, there were footprints. They were not animal footprints or people. They were deep, as if something heavy had passed through there. I was sure that no one had climbed to that summit in a long time, but the footprints were recent. They did not impress me so much at first, but when I got up to inspect them, I saw that they formed an irregular line that went into the nearby undergrowth. At first, I thought it could be my mistake, but when I observed them closely, I realized that the footprints did not have a clear shape. They were irregular, distorted, as if they were produced by something that walked clumsily, or with a different step than human. I decided not to pay much attention to it. I knew that my mind, exhausted by the climb, could be playing tricks on me. I collected my things and began the descent, but shortly after I noticed something strange. The footprints were still there like a shadow that did not fade. I followed them for a few minutes, and as I went down I noticed that they were getting closer and closer to my steps. At that moment, my sense of logic began to fail. I had climbed without seeing footprints, but now, as I descended, I realized that the footprints were following me. It was not possible. I stopped dead. There was no other human being or animal in the area. My breathing became more accelerated. Sweat began to appear on my forehead, despite the cold of altitude. I decided to take a break, breathe deeply, and think. I was tired, maybe too much. I looked around, but I only saw the same silent mountains, the same desolation. The worst thing was that the footprints did not stay behind. Somehow, something or someone was following my trail. I quickened my pace. Nervousness took hold of me, but the worst was yet to come. As I descended further, the footprints became clearer, more marked, and somehow I felt they began to move slightly away from my path. At first, I thought I was becoming paranoid, but that feeling that something or someone was so close to me, without me being able to see it, began to be overwhelming. I could feel it in the air, that emptiness, as if the mountain was watching me. I decided to take a detour from the trail, trying to get away from those footprints. If someone was really following me, I thought that by taking a less obvious path, I could lose sight of them. However, when I turned around, I observed something on the ground that chilled my blood. The footprints no longer followed a regular pattern. Some were small, others large, and seemed to go in opposite directions. Something told me I was not alone, that something or someone was altering their course on purpose, as if they were slowly approaching, knowing exactly where I was passing. At that point, my paranoia reached an unbearable level. I began to run without thinking about the loose stones under my feet. The altitude weighed on me, but fear pushed me even faster. The footprints seemed to follow me, and although I could not see anything, I felt that presence behind me. Sometimes I looked quickly over my shoulder, but I never saw anything, just the empty landscape. But something told me it was close, that it was lurking in the twilight of rocks and trees. The feeling of being followed, the oppression in my chest, did not let me rest until I finally reached the base of the mountain. Exhausted, trembling with cold and fear, I did not look back even once, although silence surrounded me like a heavy curtain. When I reached the camp, the footprints were no longer there. The trail seemed to have vanished, but something inside me knew it had been there, something I could not explain. During the following days, I returned to the nearest town and spoke with some of the locals, but no one seemed to know anything. However, when mentioning the area, one of them told me something that chilled my blood. That mountain has old stories, very old. Some say that those who go up there sometimes do not come down, or if they come down, they are not the same. The mountain does not forgive, Jake. It is not a place for loners. That night upon arriving at my home, I checked my boots and backpack. There were no signs of mud or earth that indicated the footprints were mine. But still, every time I close my eyes, I see those footprints, those distorted marks, following me to the end. And sometimes, when I close my eyes completely, I feel that the footprints are still there, very close, lurking in the shadows. The feeling of being followed did not disappear with the passing of days. In fact, it began to intensify like a shadow that lengthens, that gets into every corner of my mind. I tried to rationalize what had happened, as I always have done when things do not have immediate explanation. Maybe fatigue, the loneliness of the mountain, the hours without human contact had played with my perception, but it was not easy for me to forget it. The day after my descent, I decided to return to my mountaineer routine. I planned another expedition, this time in more familiar terrain, a peak I had already climbed several times without problems. The problem was that while preparing the equipment, I felt that same restlessness, that feeling that something was not right. I looked at photos of past summits, the routes I had followed, and everything seemed normal to me. However, I could not stop thinking about that mountain, about the footprints I saw there. Something inside me kept pressing, as if I had not finished with what had happened. Even so, I convinced myself it was just a sequel to fear. But when I got in the car to head to the new route, something strange happened. On the way, I took the same highway I had traveled when I was heading to the Sierra Nevada mountain. I do not know why, but my mind somehow forced me to follow that route. I needed to see it, check that I was not inventing anything. About 2 hours passed until I reached the area. The landscape was almost the same, but this time the road seemed narrower, more closed. I was not sure what I expected to find, but curiosity could do more. I stopped the car at the same point where I had parked before. Nothing had changed. Everything seemed quiet, empty. However, I did not feel calm. Something pushed me to walk, as if the footprints from that summit could still be nearby. At first I walked along the trail as if nothing, following my steps from before. The wind blew strong, shaking the branches of trees and raising dust in the air. I made sure to be well equipped with the compass, boots, and backpack. But as I advanced, something strange happened. At first I thought I was looking for something that did not exist. Maybe my mind had been trapped in that experience. But as I approached the base of the mountain, a feeling of discomfort enveloped me again. The same silence, the same stillness. I decided to climb a section of the mountain out of pure habit to clear my head. I was sure that when I reached the place where it all began, I would find some explanation. But what I discovered made me stop dead. In the same place where the mountain meets the trail, I found something. They were not animal footprints or boot marks. They were human footprints, but strange. They were fresher than the previous ones, as if someone or something had walked there in the last few hours. They were not clear marks, but a series of irregular, distorted impressions. I looked around, but there were no signs of life or anyone, just the distant echo of wind. I leaned down to observe the footprints more closely, and that was when I saw something even more disconcerting. Small broken branches on the ground, some almost torn as if something had dragged them, something big and heavy. My breathing quickened, and fear began to seep into my chest. I could not rationalize what I was seeing. There was no way anyone had passed through there without me having heard or seen them. I was sure it was not a human being, and it was not a known animal from the area either. The footprint pattern was too erratic, too irregular. I could not stay there much longer. The feeling of being watched grew again, and I turned around, determined to go down as fast as possible. However, something made me stop. In the middle of my hurry, when I looked up toward the summit, I saw a figure in the distance, a small shadow that moved slowly among the rocks, almost at the edge of visibility. At first I thought it was a mirage or maybe an illusion caused by fatigue, but the figure was still there. And now that I looked more carefully, I saw how it advanced, as if it was descending from the same summit. The worst thing was not that the figure moved, but the way it did. It did not walk with the agility of a human being, nor the fluidity of an animal. It was a clumsy movement, as if something was dragging itself, or maybe someone who could not stand upright. I stood paralyzed, unable to move. Fear took complete hold of me. I decided not to get any closer. I went down without thinking, looking for the trail, running without looking back, as if I could get away from what I had seen. My legs trembled and my feet stumbled over the rocks. Every time I looked back, I felt that presence, something or someone following me from the shadows. When I reached the car, I was completely beside myself. My breathing was erratic, and my mind was completely overwhelmed. I sat in the vehicle looking at the mountain I had left behind. For a second, I wondered if everything I had experienced was a product of my mind, if I had been so obsessed with that place that my imagination had created something that did not exist. But something told me it was not like that. Something was not right in that mountain. Finally, I made the decision to leave there. I gripped the steering wheel tightly and started the car, leaving behind the place that had been my refuge for so many years. That refuge that now seemed like a trap to me. That night when I arrived at my house, I checked my boots and my equipment. There were no traces of mud or earth, nothing that indicated I had been there, nothing that justified it. However, I could not stop thinking about the figure I had seen. At first I thought maybe it had been a product of stress, but then I wondered, what if it was not? What if somewhere in that mountain something strange was waiting to be discovered? Several weeks have passed since then, and I still do not dare to return to that place. When I pass near the mountain by car, my heart beats harder and I feel an oppression in my chest, as if that something that followed me is still there in the shadows. Every time I close my eyes, I see the distorted footprints on the ground, and I hear the dragged sound of that figure moving in the distance, and I wonder, what was that I saw? Who or what was really following me? The experience left me marked in a way I had never felt before. I had climbed dozens of peaks, faced storms, altitude sickness, and equipment failures, but nothing had prepared me for that feeling of being hunted by something I could not understand or see clearly. The mountain, which had always been my sanctuary, my place of peace and challenge, had become something different, something that watched back. I tried to return to my normal mountaineering routine, but every expedition felt different now. Even on familiar trails, in mountains I had climbed countless times, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. The sound of my own footsteps seemed to echo with something else, as if those distorted prints were still somewhere behind me, matching my pace step for step. Months passed before I could bring myself to research the area. I spent hours in the library, looking through old geological surveys, historical records, anything that might explain what I had encountered. What I found only deepened my unease. The Sierra Nevada region had a history of unexplained disappearances dating back over a century. Native tribes in the area had stories about the mountain spirits, beings that walked the high places and did not welcome intruders. Early settlers reported finding strange tracks in the snow, tracks that did not match any known animal. Some prospectors in the 1800s simply vanished, their camps found abandoned with no sign of struggle, only those same irregular footprints leading into the wilderness. One account from 1923 particularly caught my attention. A forestry worker described finding a series of what he called unnatural prints near the same peak I had climbed. He wrote that the prints seemed to follow hikers, always staying just out of sight, always watching. The worker had quit his job shortly after and moved away from the area, claiming the mountain was not safe for solitary travelers. I tried to contact other mountaineers who had climbed in that region, but most were reluctant to discuss their experiences. Those who did speak mentioned feeling watched, hearing sounds that did not belong, finding evidence of something that followed their movements. None wanted to return to that particular peak. The rational part of my mind kept trying to find logical explanations. Maybe it was a reclusive person living in the wilderness, someone who had learned to move quietly and observe without being seen. Maybe the tracks were from an injured animal, walking with an irregular gait. Maybe the stress and isolation of solo climbing had affected my perception more than I realized. But deep down, I knew what I had experienced was real. The footprints, the figure moving clumsily down the mountainside, the feeling of being observed by something that understood the terrain better than any human could. Something that had been there long before mountaineers like me had ever set foot on those slopes. I have not returned to the Sierra Nevada since that day. When other climbers ask about routes in that area, I find myself steering them toward different peaks, safer mountains, where the only things that follow you are your own echoes and shadows. I tell them the weather is unpredictable there. The rock is unstable, anything to keep them away. Sometimes, late at night when the wind is howling outside my cabin, I think I can still hear those footsteps. Not the steady rhythm of human movement, but that irregular, dragging sound that followed me down the mountain. And in those moments, I am grateful for the walls around me, for the distance between myself and those lonely peaks where something still walks, still watches, still follows the trails of those who venture too far into its domain. The mountain had taught me many things over the years about perseverance, about respect for nature, about finding strength I did not know I possessed. But this final lesson was different. It taught me that some places are not meant for us, that some mysteries are better left unsolved, and that sometimes the greatest courage is knowing when to walk away and never look back. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.